What's up everyone? You're here at The Fiction Wizard. We're dropping something epic today. Harry passed out at platform 9 3/4 and goblins detected 143 magic blocks plus 15 hidden lordship rings. Like and subscribe if you enjoy. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The weight of what you are. The station was loud in the way only King's Cross could be on a Tuesday morning. Trolleys rattling, pigeons arguing somewhere in the rafters, a woman in a yellow coat shouting at someone named Gerald. Harry Potter stood in the middle of all of it with a trolley that had a wonky wheel, an owl that hadn't stopped complaining since Privet Drive, and exactly no idea what he was looking for. Platform 9 3/4. He'd read the ticket 3 times on the drive over, which Uncle Vernon had made as unpleasant as physically possible, keeping the radio on a station that played nothing but traffic updates, refusing to help with the trolley, and delivering a parting speech about freaks and their freak schools that Harry had long since learned to let wash over him like water off a particularly bored duck. None of that mattered now. What mattered was that platforms 9 and 10 were right in front of him, separated by a very solid-looking brick pillar, and no amount of squinting made a platform 9 3/4 appear. He stood there for a moment, Hedwig shifting on her perch and clicking her beak in the way that meant she was either annoyed or nervous. He hadn't quite worked out which was which yet. "You don't know either, do you?" he said to her. She ruffled her feathers. "Definitely nervous, then." He looked at the pillar again. A family had walked past him 3 times now, a mother with red hair and what seemed like an impractical number of children, and he'd been working up to asking them when the youngest boy, freckled and gap-toothed, caught his eye and then looked away quickly. The mother was saying something about muggles. The word landed in Harry's chest in a way he couldn't explain, like a coin dropping into deep water. He'd heard that word before. Not from anyone who'd said it deliberately to him, but in snatches. Aunt Petunia on the phone once, voice sharp and low and strange. A word she used the way people use words they're afraid of. Harry grabbed his trolley and pushed toward the red-haired family with the practiced confidence of someone who had learned very early that hesitating got you nothing except a longer wait in whatever unpleasant situation you were already in. "Excuse me," he said. The mother turned. She had a warm face, the kind that looked like it had spent a lot of time either laughing or worrying and had settled somewhere between the two. She looked at him, then at his trolley, then at Hedwig, and her expression shifted into something immediately recognizable as the look adults gave you when they knew something you didn't. "First time?" she asked. "Is it that obvious?" "Only a little." "Platform 9 3/4, is it?" "Yeah." She nodded and set her hands on her hips in a businesslike sort of way. "Simple enough. You walk straight at the barrier between 9 and 10, don't stop, don't slow down, and don't think too hard about it. Thinking's the thing that gets people. Off you go, then. Percy, you go first, show him it's done." One of the older boys, tall, wearing a prefect badge he seemed very aware of, pushed his trolley at the pillar without breaking stride and vanished through it. Harry stared at the spot where the boy had been. "Right," he said. He pointed his own trolley at the pillar and walked. He did not slow down. He did not think about it, or he tried not to, anyway. What he did notice, about 4 steps from the barrier, was that something shifted in the air around him. A pressure. Not unpleasant exactly, more like the feeling of stepping into a room where the temperature has changed without warning. He'd felt things like that before, odd moments where the air went thick and strange, usually right before something happened that the Dursleys would later pretend hadn't. He'd learned not to mention those moments. He went through the pillar. The sound changed first. The muggle noise of King's Cross, Gerald and the woman in the yellow coat and the pigeon dispute, all of it fell away and was replaced with something fuller and stranger. A steam engine billowing great clouds of white smoke into a vaulted space that shouldn't have existed between platforms 9 and 10 but very clearly did. Students everywhere. Trunks and owls and cats. A conductor in a deep red uniform checking a pocket watch. The scarlet Hogwarts Express sitting on the track like it had been there since the beginning of time and was not particularly impressed by any of it. Harry stopped walking. He didn't mean to. His feet just stopped. The pressure that had started at the barrier didn't go away when he came through. It got worse. Not painful, not exactly, more like the feeling of too much sound in a small space, except it wasn't sound, it was something inside him. Something that had been sitting very still and quiet for 11 years and had now, without his permission, decided to wake up. His hand went to the pillar behind him. Or he meant it to. He wasn't entirely sure what his hands were doing. Hedwig screamed. Actually screamed, a sharp, alarmed sound nothing like her usual complaints. Several people turned to look. The pressure crested like a wave. Harry's vision went white. He was aware, briefly, of the ground coming up to meet him. Then he wasn't aware of anything at all. He came back to himself in pieces. Sound first, voices, urgent and overlapping. Then the feeling of something hard under his back, which was the platform, and something cool against the side of his face, which turned out to be his own arm. Then light, too much of it, and a collection of faces looking down at him that he didn't recognize except for the red-haired mother who had gone from warm and businesslike to sharp-eyed and doing something about this faster than most adults Harry had ever known managed anything. "Don't try to sit up," she said, which was the exact moment Harry tried to sit up. He made it halfway before the world tilted and he thought better of it. "I'm fine," he said, which was something he'd said so many times in his life under such a variety of circumstances that it came out completely automatically. A bruise from falling off a bike. A cut from Dudley's friends. 11 years of variations on the theme. He said it like breathing. "You're not fine," said the red-haired mother, in the tone of someone who had said the exact same thing to the exact same automatic response more times than she could count. "You fainted. On a train platform. You're 11 years old." 12 in July, Harry said, which wasn't really the point. Someone in the crowd said something. Then someone else said something back, and the tone of it was different, lower, not alarmed but careful, the way voices get when people are deciding something. Harry blinked until his vision settled and looked past the red-haired mother and her cluster of children. 3 figures stood at the edge of the space that had cleared around him. They were short, shorter than him, which wasn't a height Harry was used to being on the advantageous end of, with slate-gray skin and black eyes that caught the light in a way that human eyes didn't. They wore dark uniforms, precise and formal, and they were looking at him the way you look at something you have been expecting for a very long time. Goblins. Harry had read about them. Hagrid, the enormous man who had appeared at the Dursleys' door 11 days ago and changed everything in the span of an evening, had taken him to Gringotts when he collected Harry's gold. Harry remembered the goblins from then, distant, professional, doing their work with the manner of people who considered you temporary and inconvenient. These 3 were not that. These 3 were paying attention to him in a way that made his skin prickle even through whatever had just happened to him. The one in the middle stepped forward. He was older than the other 2, or Harry assumed he was, from the way the other 2 held themselves slightly behind him, not standing at attention exactly, but with a deference so automatic it had become posture. He carried nothing except his own stillness. "Harry James Potter," the goblin said. His voice was precise and dry, the kind of voice that had spent a great deal of time being right about things and saw no reason to change its habit. "Yeah," Harry said, which was not his most impressive opener. "You will come with us." The red-haired mother made a sound that was somewhere between objection and question. The goblin did not look at her. "This is a matter of Gringotts authority," he said, still looking at Harry. "The boy is not in danger. He will be returned before the train departs, or," and here something shifted very slightly in the goblin's expression, something that might, in a different face, have been called amusement, "other arrangements will be made." "Who are you?" Harry asked. A pause. Not the pause of someone who doesn't know the answer, but the pause of someone who is deciding whether the person asking is worth the full answer. "Ragnok," the goblin said. "Director of Gringotts Bank, sovereign representative of the Goblin Nation, and the individual your inheritance assigned as primary executor 17 days after your birth. That will do for introductions. He tilted his head a fraction. Can you stand? Harry considered this. He pressed one hand to the platform and pushed himself upright. The world tilted again, less severely this time, and then steadied. He was aware of Hedwig's cage on the trolley, still rattling slightly from when he'd fallen. He was aware of the red-haired mother watching him with an expression that was trying to be reassuring and landing somewhere closer to worried. He was aware of the platform around him, the press of students, the steam, the enormous red train, and the way the air still felt wrong, too thick and too close, pressing against the inside of his ribs. Yeah, he said. I can stand. He looked at Ragnok. The goblin looked back at him with those flat black eyes that held something Harry wasn't sure he had a word for yet. Lead the way, then, Harry said. They didn't go back through the barrier. That would have been the obvious route, but obvious was apparently not a Gringotts priority. Ragnok walked to the far end of the platform, past the engine and the conductor who stepped aside without being asked, and through a door in the station wall that Harry was fairly certain had not been there a moment ago. Beyond it was a corridor, stone, not the tile and brick of King's Cross, lit by lamps that burned without flame, the light a warm amber that made the shadows soft. The two other goblins followed behind Harry without comment. He didn't feel threatened by them. He didn't feel much of anything except a bone-deep tiredness and the continued pressure in his chest, which had eased when he stood but hadn't gone away. What happened to me? He asked, addressing the question to Ragnok's back. You are aware that you have magic? Ragnok said, still walking. I've known for about 11 days. Before that I just knew things happened. Things happened, Ragnok repeated, with the air of someone filing that phrasing under understatement of the century. Yes. What happened on the platform is what occurs when a containment structure exceeds its limits. You have been under significant, he paused, searching for the right word, and Harry got the sense this was someone who rarely had to search, compression. For a very long time. The magical environment of Platform 9 3/4 triggered a pressure event. Your body responded by removing itself from consciousness until the immediate spike could settle. I fainted because I have too much magic. Essentially. Harry thought about this. They walked in silence for a moment, the amber lamps passing overhead in a slow rhythm. Hagrid told me I have my mum and dad's vault, Harry said. He didn't mention anything about, he didn't mention too much magic. Hagrid is a groundskeeper, Ragnok said. Not unkindly. Simply accurately. Right. The corridor ended at a door that was significantly more impressive than the one they'd entered through, dark metal, etched with patterns that Harry couldn't quite look at directly without his eyes trying to slide away, as if the carvings existed at an angle slightly outside normal vision. Ragnok pressed 2 fingers flat against the center of it and said something short and guttural that wasn't English or any language Harry had a name for. The door opened inward. Beyond it was Gringotts. Or rather, a part of Gringotts Harry hadn't seen on his trip with Hagrid, not the soaring marble lobby with its chandeliers and long counters and general organized chaos, but something deeper and older. A chamber with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above them, lit by those same amber lamps in great iron brackets along the walls. At the center was a table carved from something that wasn't quite stone, its surface smooth and dark. Chairs around it that were clearly not designed for human proportions, though 2 on one side were shaped differently, as if expecting visitors who weren't goblins. 3 other goblins were already in the room. They rose when Ragnok entered, which told Harry something about Ragnok's position that his title had already suggested. Sit, Ragnok told Harry, gesturing to one of the human-shaped chairs. Harry sat. He looked around the room while Ragnok exchanged something with the other goblins in that guttural language, low and quick, the sound of people moving through information they'd already mostly processed and were now confirming. On the table in front of the empty chair across from Harry was a device he had no reference for. It was small, perhaps the size of a shoebox, made of something that looked like dark bronze, covered in tiny needle-like protrusions and what appeared to be dials. Several of the dials were maxed out. Several more were vibrating. One of the other goblins noticed Harry looking at it and said something to Ragnok. Ragnok glanced at the device and then at Harry, and for the first time something crossed his face that was unambiguously readable. Surprise. Very controlled, very brief, but there. He sat down across from Harry and folded his hands on the table. I will be direct with you, Ragnok said. I'd appreciate that, Harry said. Gringotts monitoring instruments are installed at every major magical junction in Britain. They measure ambient magical signatures. Platform 9 3/4 is one such junction. When you passed through the barrier this morning, you triggered a magnitude reading that has not been recorded in this country since 1492. Harry stared at him. In 1492, Ragnok continued, the individual responsible was a man named Emrys Caldwell, who was later discovered to be carrying 5 suppressed lordship inheritances and had spent 40 years living as a Muggle farmer outside Cardiff. He was brought here. We did his inheritance ritual. He nearly took the roof off this building. The goblin's expression remained precisely neutral. Our instruments measured you at more than twice his initial reading. The room was very quiet. How is that possible? Harry asked. We intend to find out. With your permission. Harry looked at the device on the table. Then at Ragnok. Then, because sitting in a room with highly competent people who were treating him like he was the most interesting problem they'd encountered in centuries was somehow easier than any of the past 11 years had been, he felt something in his chest relax a fraction. What do you need me to do? He asked. What they needed him to do, it turned out, was put his hand on the device. One of the other goblins, introduced as Sharpclaw, who was the head of what Ragnok called the Inheritance and Lineage Division, and who had the demeanor of someone who ate complicated problems for breakfast and was perpetually mildly disappointed at how uncomplicated most of them turned out to be, adjusted several of the dials first. Harry watched him work. Sharpclaw's hands were quick and precise, the movements of someone who had done this so many times it had bypassed conscious thought entirely. When he stepped back, he nodded at Harry. Harry put his right hand flat on top of the device. The effect was immediate. All the tiny needle protrusions rose at once. The dials didn't just move, several of them spun hard enough that they blurred. A sound came from the device, a low harmonic that Harry felt in his back teeth more than heard with his ears. Then something appeared above the device, not light exactly, more like the suggestion of structure, lines of it, branching and layering, and Harry had the impression of looking at something impossibly large through a very small window. Sharpclaw made a sound. Ragnok looked at the structure above the device and said nothing at all. Harry looked between them. Is that bad? No, Ragnok said. It is, and there was that searching pause again, unprecedented. You keep using that word. It keeps being accurate. Sharpclaw rattled something off in gobbledygook and Ragnok responded without looking away from Harry. Then Ragnok said, in English, how old did you say you were? 11. 12 in July. And for 11 years you have been living in a non-magical household. The Dursleys. Yeah. They didn't like anything to do with magic. They liked pretending it didn't exist. Ragnok nodded slowly. That explains the compression. 11 years of suppression, not a formal binding, which we would have detected immediately, but environmental. Passive suppression. A magical child denied any outlet, any expression, any acknowledgement. The magic doesn't disappear. It compresses. He looked at the structure floating above the device. In your case it compressed 143 distinct magical signatures into a space that should not have been able to contain them. Harry's hand was still on the device. He could feel it now, a warmth from the bronze that matched something inside his chest, the pressure he'd been carrying all morning, responding to the device like a key finding a lock. 143, he said. Blocks, Sharpclaw said. His English was precise and slightly accented. We call them blocks. Each one is a discrete unit of magical inheritance, power, knowledge, ability, sometimes specific magical disciplines, that has been compressed rather than expressed. You have 143 of them. He paused. The standard wizard has between 6 and 12. Oh, Harry said. Yes, Sharpclaw said. Harry looked at the structure above the device again. It was still shifting, still producing new lines and branches, and he had the sense it wasn't finished. Like a sentence that kept adding clauses. And the rings, he said. He didn't know why he said it. He hadn't meant to, the word just came out, as if something inside him already knew the question before his brain had finished forming it. Ragnok and Sharpclaw looked at each other. What do you know about Lordship rings? Ragnok asked. Nothing. That word just appeared. Another exchange in gobbledygook. Shorter this time, the kind of exchange where both people already agree and are just confirming it. Remove your hand from the device, Ragnok said. Harry did. The structure above the device vanished. The needles settled. The dials, most of them, stopped moving. 3 continued to spin, slow and deliberate, as if making a point. Hold out both hands, Ragnok said. Palms up. Harry held out both hands. For a moment nothing happened. Then he felt them, not pain, nothing sharp, more like warmth finding its shape, like putting on something that fit perfectly for the first time. On his right hand, 3 rings appeared, settling into place with a solidity that felt permanent, ancient, and entirely unsurprised by his existence. On his left hand, 2 more. 5 rings. 5 different metals or materials, he couldn't identify all of them. 1 black, one that shone like polished bone, 1 silver so deep it was almost blue, 1 that appeared to shift color as he turned his hand, and 1 that was simply gold, plain and warm, but when he looked at it directly he had the strangest feeling it was looking back. Harry set both hands flat on the table. The goblin in the corner, the one who hadn't been introduced yet, who had been silent the whole time and whom Harry had almost managed to forget about, drew a short, sharp breath. Ragnok looked at the rings. Then at Harry. His expression had moved through surprise and out the other side into something quieter and more complex. Mr. Potter, he said. Harry said. A pause. Harry, Ragnok said, and the correction cost him something, Harry could tell, not offense, just the recalibration of a man who had spent a great deal of time maintaining appropriate distance from people whose inheritances he managed, and who was beginning to suspect that distance was not going to be possible in this particular case. What I am about to explain to you is not common knowledge. Some of what I am about to explain to you is not knowledge at all in any formal sense, it is Gringotts' historical record, which is a different thing, and a more reliable one. All right, Harry said. The rings you are wearing did not come from Gringotts. They did not come from the Potter family vault. They came from you, from the compression inside you, pushing outward. They are inheritance rings. The physical manifestation of lordship claims, magical lines that have gone dormant, in some cases for centuries, that have been passed through blood until they found an heir capable of bearing them. He folded his hands again. In the entire recorded history of the Goblin Nation, we have found a maximum of 3 lordship rings on a single individual. You manifest 5 in a single session before we have even begun a formal inheritance ritual. The warmth from the rings was still there. Not urgent now, just present. Like 5 separate heartbeats layered inside his own. There are 15 total, Harry said. Not a guess. He didn't know how he knew. But he knew. Ragnok studied him for a long moment. Yes, he said. 15. The other 10 are still compressed. The 5 you wear now, those your magic considered the most urgent, the most foundational, release themselves at first contact. The remaining 10 will emerge through the inheritance ritual. He paused. If you choose to undertake it. Harry looked at the 5 rings. He flexed his fingers. They didn't feel heavy. They felt, right was the only word he had for it, and it seemed embarrassingly simple against the scale of what Ragnok was telling him, but it was true. What happens if I don't? He asked. Not because he was hesitating. More because he wanted to understand the full picture. The compression continues. Platform 9 3/4 was a mild event compared to what will happen over the coming months as your magic naturally attempts to expand into Hogwarts' ambient field. You will black out. Possibly several times. Possibly in ways that are more dangerous than this morning. Ragnok's voice stayed level. And 10 lordships will remain unclaimed for another generation. What are the 15? Harry asked. Sharpclaw opened a folder, an actual folder, leather-bound and very old by its look, and set it on the table between them. He slid it toward Harry. The top of the first page read, Preliminary Lineage Assessment, Harry James Potter, Convergent Lord Profile. Harry read the first 5 names on the list. He stopped. Potter, he said. I already knew that one. Yes. Peveril. The Peveril line died in the male line in 1420. It passed through the female line into several families, including the Potters. You are the last convergence point. Gryffindor, Harry said. He said it the way you say a word that's too big for the air in front of you. Godric Gryffindor died without a direct male heir, Sharpclaw said, in the tone of someone reciting well-worn fact. The lordship went dormant. The magical line didn't die, it never dies. It migrated. Through 9 generations of intermittent female line descent, it arrived in your grandmother's bloodline. Harry's finger moved down the page. Slytherin. Complete silence. Even Ragnok's precisely managed expression did something complicated. Through the Gaunt line? Harry said. No, Ragnok said. That is the assumption most would make, and it is incorrect. The Gaunts carry Slytherin's blood, yes, but the lordship itself, the magical title, the formal inheritance, passed through an entirely separate branch. A line the Gaunts never knew existed. It passed through your mother's side. Harry looked up from the folder. My mum's side. My mum was Muggle-born. Your mother was Muggle-raised, Ragnok said, with careful precision. That is not the same thing. Lily Evans's maternal grandmother was adopted. We have known this at Gringotts for 30 years. Her biological family was a dormant magical line. Very old. Very old. Harry set the folder down. He looked at his hands, at the 5 rings, at the skin underneath them, at the ordinary-looking hands of an 11-year-old boy who'd spent the last decade sleeping in a cupboard. I'm a Slytherin heir, he said. You are the Slytherin Lord, Ragnok corrected. Among other things. And Voldemort, he's been going around saying he's the heir of Slytherin. He has Slytherin's blood, Ragnok said. He has no lordship claim. The magic has already decided. The magic decided before you were born. Harry thought about this for a moment. Then he picked up the folder again and kept reading. He went through the remaining names with the careful attention of someone who is absorbing large amounts of information not by panicking at the scale of it but by taking it one piece at a time, which was a skill he developed over 11 years of being given no good options and learning to work with whatever he had. When he reached the bottom of the list, he set the folder down again. Merlin, he said. The last name on the list. Merlin's line survived? It is Gringotts' most closely held historical record, Sharpclaw said. Merlin did not die childless. He had one daughter, born of a union that was not publicly known. The line descended quietly. It is extremely diluted at this point, you carry perhaps 1 part in 2,000 of Merlin's direct blood. But the lordship is not about the percentage of blood. It is about the convergence. You are the point at which enough separate streams have gathered to reactivate the claim. One part in 2000 of Merlin, Harry said. Yes. But I still get the Lordship. Magic is not a democracy, Ragnok said. It does not care about percentages. It cares about fit. The Lordship goes to the individual whose magical core is the correct shape to carry it. Yours is. Harry sat with that for a moment. Outside, somewhere very far above them, through layers of stone and magic and the bureaucratic machinery of the oldest financial institution in the wizarding world, was a train platform. The Hogwarts Express. A future that everyone around him had already decided the shape of. Dumbledore's careful plans. The prophecy. The boy who lived, which was a title someone had given him for something that happened when he was 1 year old and which he'd been carrying like a stone ever since. He looked at the rings. He looked at Ragnok. Dumbledore, he said. Does he know about any of this? Ragnok's expression was carefully neutral in a way that was itself an answer. Albus Dumbledore, Ragnok said, is the chief warlock of the Wizengamot, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, and headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. He is also the individual who filed your initial magical guardianship papers with the Ministry of Magic 10 years ago. A pause, precise as a scalpel. He has never filed an inheritance inquiry with Gringotts on your behalf. He could have. If he'd wanted to know. He could have filed an inquiry any time in the past 10 years. The fee is 3 sickles. Harry exhaled through his nose. Right, he said quietly. Not angry. Not yet, or maybe not in the sharp, hot way that would come later when he'd had time to sit with it. Right now it was more like the feeling of a puzzle piece clicking into place, of the shape of a thing becoming visible. Dumbledore had known something. Had chosen not to know more. Had left him on a doorstep in Little Whinging with people who hated magic and let 11 years of compression build up until he fainted on a train platform. He filed that away. He'd deal with it when he could. The inheritance ritual, he said. How long does it take? For someone with your profile, Sharpclaw said, and given that 5 rings have already manifested, the full ritual, including documentation of all 15 lordships and the formal unsealing of all 143 blocks, would take approximately 4 hours under controlled conditions. And the train leaves at 11. In approximately 2.5 hours. Harry thought about this. And if I miss the train? Gringotts maintains a secure transit connection to Hogsmeade Station, Ragnok said. For clients of sufficient standing. Something in his voice suggested he was well aware of the irony. You would arrive at Hogwarts before the students do. The sorting ceremony begins at 7 in the evening. You have time. Harry looked at Ragnok directly. Not checking, exactly, more taking the measure of something. He'd gotten good at reading adults over the years. Good at knowing the difference between adults who wanted things from you and adults who wanted things for you and adults who had simply decided what you were and intended to proceed accordingly. Ragnok was something else. Ragnok was looking at him like he was a genuine unknown, which was rare enough to be almost comfortable. Why are you doing this? Harry asked. I know you have professional reasons. But you came yourself. To a train platform. You're the director. You could have sent someone. Ragnok held his gaze. I could have. So why didn't you? A pause that felt different from the others. Less about choosing words and more about choosing whether to answer honestly. Because, Ragnok said, the last time a convergent lord was identified by our instruments, the director of Gringotts sent a junior representative and a form letter. The convergent lord in question decided he did not require goblin assistance, went on to burn down his own inheritance through ignorance, and we lost 300 years of opportunity for our nation because no one thought his discovery was worth their personal attention. He unfolded his hands. I have no intention of repeating that mistake. Harry nodded. Fair enough. He looked at the folder again. At the 5 rings. At the device on the table with 3 dials still slowly spinning. He was 11 years old and hungry, because he hadn't had breakfast because Aunt Petunia had pointedly made eggs for Dudley and not him, and he had an owl upstairs on a train platform who was probably going spare, and somewhere out there was a school full of people who had already decided what Harry Potter was. He was something different from what any of them thought. He'd been something different for 11 years without knowing it. "All right," he said, and his voice came out steady, which was something he was quietly proud of. "Let's do the ritual." Ragnok looked at him for a moment. Then the goblin did something Harry had not expected and would not have predicted. He inclined his head. Not a bow, nothing so dramatic. A small, precise acknowledgement, the kind that meant more from someone who gave them rarely. "The ritual chamber is this way," Ragnok said, and rose. Harry pushed back his chair and stood. The 5 rings caught the amber light of the goblin's lamps, black and bone-white and deep silver and shifting color and plain gold, and whatever had been pressing against the inside of his ribs all morning settled into something slower and steadier. Not gone. Just patient. Waiting. He'd been waiting too, he supposed. He just hadn't known what for. He followed Ragnok through the door at the back of the chamber, and the door closed behind them, and somewhere above them in a world that had already decided too many things without asking him, the Hogwarts Express sat on its platform and waited, and the clock kept moving, and everything that Harry Potter had been told he was began, very quietly, to become insufficient. Chapter 2, 15 Names, 1 Blood. The ritual chamber was not what Harry expected, mostly because he had no framework for what to expect and his brain had defaulted to something vaguely dramatic, pillars, maybe, or fire, or at minimum something that looked important enough to justify the phrase, ritual chamber. What he got instead was a room about the size of a large classroom, the walls a deep charcoal stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with a single circular depression in the floor perhaps 6 feet across, filled with water so still it looked solid. Above the depression, suspended from the ceiling by chains he couldn't see, hung a basin of dark metal that matched the device from the previous room. Runes covered every surface, not decorative, not the way the ministry plastered runes on things to look official. These were working runes, and they were working, shifting almost imperceptibly in the stone, moving the way the second hand of a clock moves if you watch it directly. No candles. No chanting. 2 goblins Harry hadn't seen before stood at the edge of the depression with equipment that looked more like laboratory instruments than anything ceremonial. "I expected more drama," Harry said. "Drama is for people who are uncertain whether something will work," Sharpclaw said, from directly behind him. Harry hadn't heard him follow. "We are not uncertain." One of the goblins at the basin said something. Sharpclaw responded. Then he looked at Harry and said, "Remove your shoes and socks." Harry removed his shoes and socks, which felt deeply anticlimactic. "Step into the pool." Harry stepped into the pool. The water was neither cold nor warm, it was exactly body temperature, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been freezing. It came up to mid-shin. The stone floor of the depression was smooth under his feet. He could feel the runes through the soles of his feet, which should not have been possible and yet absolutely was, a low vibration like standing on train tracks moments before the train arrives. "What exactly happens now?" Harry asked. Ragnok stood at the edge of the pool. He had produced, from somewhere, a thin leather-bound book that he was not reading but holding the way someone holds something they know by memory and carries anyway, out of habit. "The inheritance ritual has 3 stages," Ragnok said. "In the first, the pool reads your bloodline. Every drop of magical blood in your ancestry contributes to what's in the water, it will map what you carry. In the second stage, those lordship claims that are legitimate and active will be drawn forward. The 10 remaining rings will manifest. In the third stage, the blocks, your 143 compressed units of magic, will be presented. We will not unseal all of them today. That would be, take the roof off the building?" Harry said, remembering the Cardiff farmer from 1492. Similar concern, yes. We will unseal the first tier today. Perhaps 40 blocks. The rest will unseal naturally over the coming weeks as your system adjusts. Harry looked down at the water. Nothing was happening yet. What do I do? Nothing. The ritual does not require your active participation. It requires your presence and your willingness. The magic does the rest. That's it? That is it. Harry stood in the pool and waited. For about 30 seconds, nothing happened at all, and he had time to notice that the ritual chamber smelled faintly of something metallic and ancient, like very old coins or the inside of a clock. Then the water changed. Not dramatically, not in the way water in stories changes, going dark or glowing or swirling meaningfully. It became slightly more present, if that made sense, the way a room feels different when someone enters it. The vibration through his feet deepened. Then it started. The water rose. Just slightly, an inch, perhaps, climbing the walls of the depression without any visible cause, and as it rose it went from transparent to something that had color in it, not a single color but many, layered, the way you see multiple shades in deep water. Harry watched it and felt, running parallel to the visual, something inside him responding to it, a drawing-out sensation, not painful but thorough, like the feeling of turning out your pockets when someone needs to know what you're carrying. Names appeared above the water. Not written, more like they were being spoken in a medium that wasn't quite sound, and if you looked at the right angle you could see them. Harry looked. The Potter line came first, which made sense. Golden letters, or what read as golden, branching upward and back, generations of it, his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and beyond that into names he didn't know and histories he'd never been told. He watched it with the hunger of someone who has been kept from information about their own family for their entire life. A great-great-grandmother named Ignotus. A connection there to the Peveril line that the letters mapped without commentary, the branch points clean and factual. His mother's line came second, and this one made his chest tight in a way he hadn't expected. Lily Evans. And before her, Rose Evans, née Beaumont. And before that, the name changed, the script shifted, and suddenly it wasn't Evans or Beaumont at all. The adopted grandmother that Ragnok had mentioned. Her birth name surfaced in the water like something coming up from very deep, and Harry couldn't quite read it because the script was older than any English he knew, but he saw in it the shape of something ancient, something that Ragnok quietly confirmed with a murmur to Sharpclaw that Harry caught the edge of, there, the Slytherin branch, as we recorded. His mother had carried Slytherin's line without knowing. Had given it to Harry without knowing. Had died without knowing what her son would inherit from her beyond green eyes and a talent for charms. He stood very still in the water and let himself feel that for exactly as long as it took to feel it, and then he tucked it away because there was more coming and he needed to pay attention. The Gryffindor line mapped itself, and it was extraordinary, not a straight descent but a branching, reticulated network of intermittent inheritance passed through daughters and second cousins and once through an illegitimate line that the water traced without judgment. It converged on his paternal grandmother's bloodline in a way that Sharpclaw, watching, gave a single satisfied nod at, as if a long-held theory had been confirmed. Peveril was simpler. Older. The branch was thin by this point, centuries of dilution, but it was there, and it was unbroken, and Harry noticed that on both sides of his family, Potter and Evans, there were Peveril convergence points, separate streams from the same ancient source arriving in him from two directions simultaneously. The three brothers, he said, quietly. Ragnok looked up from his book. Yes. The Potter line descends from Ignotus Peveril, the youngest. Your mother's line, at a very great remove, carries a fragment of Antioch's descent. Both streams in one individual is unprecedented, Harry said. You're learning the word, Ragnok said, with something that might, in better light, have been a very dry smile. The water kept rising, kept building, and the names kept coming. 7 more lordships mapped themselves through the first stage of the ritual, names Harry recognized: Longbottom, which made him frown; Ravenclaw, which he hadn't expected; Flammel, which made one of the goblins across the pool make a sound very much like someone who had just placed a very surprising bet on a horse race and watched it win. 5 more that were older or rarer, names from wizarding history that Harry half recognized from the books he'd torn through in the past 11 days. One name he didn't recognize at all, something pre-Norman, the letters practically vibrating with age. And at the end of the first stage, appearing last and with a quality that was different from all the others, quieter, somehow, but more certain, the way a foundation is quieter than the walls built on top of it, the name that Sharpclaw had already told him would be there. Merlin. The letters didn't glow or pulse or do anything dramatic. They simply were, with the absolute confidence of something that has existed for so long that it has stopped needing to prove itself. Harry looked at them for a long moment. Then the second stage began. The remaining 10 rings came in a rush, nothing like the careful individual emergence of the first 5. They arrived all at once, settling onto his fingers with that same feeling of rightness, both hands suddenly full, multiple rings on some fingers, each one distinct in material and temperature. Some were warm, some cool, one was neither. He looked down at his hands and they looked utterly alien, covered in rings that had no business being on an 11-year-old boy's hands, and yet the weight was exactly right, the way something feels when it's always been yours. 15, he said. 15, Ragnok confirmed. One of the goblins by the basin spoke urgently. Sharpclaw crossed to him quickly and looked at whatever reading the instruments were showing. Harry watched Sharpclaw's face, which was the face of a professional encountering something outside his professional experience, cycling rapidly through surprise and recalibration and landing on focused attention. "What is it?" Harry asked. "The blocks," Sharpclaw said, turning. "The unsealing for the first tier. We said 40. He paused. "The ritual has calculated 63. Is that bad? It means your system has been compressed past the point where partial release is sufficient for stability. 63 blocks will unseal today or the remaining ones will continue to destabilize." He met Harry's eyes, and his look was frank and professional. "It will be intense. But it won't take the roof off," Harry said. Sharpclaw looked at the ceiling briefly. "Probably not." "Probably. The chamber is warded for up to 3 times the Caldwell event. We are," he calculated visibly, "within parameters." "Right," Harry said. "Go ahead." "You're certain?" "You just told me my choices are, do it now, or, keep passing out at inopportune moments." "Yes, I'm certain." Sharpclaw turned back to the basin and said something that carried the quality of a technical instruction, not a spell in the English sense, something older and more structural, the verbal equivalent of turning a key in a lock that had many tumblers. The runes on the walls shifted. The light in the room changed, the amber going warmer, more golden, more alive. The water in the pool rose around Harry to waist height. And then the blocks began to unseal. He'd been braced for pain. That had been his frame of reference, 11 years of things happening to him being generally accompanied by some form of pain, one way or another. What actually happened was not painful. It was enormous. Each block as it unsealed was like a door opening inside him, not a door being forced, but a door that had been held shut for a long time finally released. Behind each door was something. Not just raw power, though there was that, undeniable and rushing and warm, but something more specific. Knowledge that arrived not as text but as understanding, bone-deep and immediate. Capability that settled into place like muscle memory for things he'd never actually done. He could feel the pool responding, the water rising further as his magic expanded to fill it, and the runes on the walls were moving faster now, cycling through configurations at speed. He counted, because counting gave him something to hold on to. 1 through 10 came fast and felt like coming up for air, a general expansion of everything, his senses sharpening, the chamber becoming more present and detailed around him, Ragnok and Sharpclaw and the other goblins becoming more distinct, their postures and breathing and the specific quality of their attention more readable than they'd been a moment before. 11 through 20 felt like language, not words, but the underlying structure of language, the architecture of how magic was expressed and shaped and directed. He understood, suddenly and without studying it, why certain spells used certain words. The logic of it. The grammar. 21 through 30 were the Lordship inheritances making themselves known more specifically, flashes of specific abilities or affinities. He felt Gryffindor's like a heat in his sternum, a boldness that wasn't recklessness but certainty. He felt Slytherin's like clarity, like the ability to see through surfaces to structure, and he understood immediately why that ability had been so badly misrepresented by the people who'd misused it. Ravenclaw's was quieter, a particular quality of attention, precise and joyful. 31 through 40 were stranger, older, things he had no reference for that settled into him like sediment into a riverbed, becoming part of the landscape without announcing themselves. 41 through 63 came as a wave. He was aware of the water reaching chest height. He was aware of being warm, genuinely warm, not feverish but lit from inside, the way he'd always imagined those Christmas mornings he'd never had might feel. He was aware of Ragnok at the edge of the pool, perfectly still, watching with an expression that was the most openly human thing he'd worn since they'd met. He was aware of himself, maybe for the first time, as a complete thing. Not the boy who lived. Not the orphan. Not the freak from Privet Drive with the cupboard bedroom. Not even the heir of 15 lines, which was an absurd thing to be. Just, himself. Harry. With all the pieces of him present and no longer locked away, for the first time since he was old enough to have pieces that could be locked. The 63rd block unsealed. The water dropped back to mid-shin level as if it had never risen. Harry stood in the pool and breathed. The room was very quiet. "Well," said Sharpclaw, looking at his instruments. He said it in the tone of a man whose instruments are showing him something that will require a new category. "Well." Ragnok walked to the edge of the pool. "Harry." Harry looked up. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it. "Like I've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and I've just put it down." He paused. "And now I feel what my actual body feels like without the weight, which is different." "That's an accurate description," Ragnok said. Harry waded out of the pool. His feet found the floor of the chamber, and he noticed immediately and without meaning to that the stone was composed of 3 different types of mineral that had been cut and fitted with extraordinary precision, and that the runes nearest the door were maintenance runes, not ritual ones, and that Ragnok had a very slight irregularity in his breathing pattern that suggested he was more affected by what he just witnessed than he intended to show. He noticed all of that in the span of 2 seconds. It had taken him considerably longer to notice considerably less a half hour ago. He picked up his socks and shoes and sat on the bench at the edge of the chamber to put them on. The 15 rings caught the light. He looked at them for a moment, then looked at his bare feet, which were ordinary and slightly bony and had not changed at all, and there was something grounding about that. He was still himself. Just, more of himself. "The documentation," he said, tying his laces. "For the Lordships. How does that work?" Sharpclaw produced the leather folder again, now considerably thicker. "We prepare the formal inheritance declarations. They will be filed with the Goblin Registry, which predates the Ministry of Magic by approximately 800 years and is not subject to Ministry oversight. Copies will be held in your vault. You will receive a copy." He paused. "There are also practical implications." "Like what?" 15 lordships include seats on the Wisengamot. The number of seats varies by lordship, but across 15 claims you hold a significant block. Additionally, several of the lordships carry properties, estates, assets, invested gold, that have been held in trust. Some of them for centuries. Harry finished tying his shoes. "How much gold are we talking?" Sharpclaw told him. Harry sat quietly for a moment. That's a great deal of gold, he said. Yes. More than I'll ever realistically spend. Significantly more. He stood up. Put a quarter of the income in a fund for education. Muggleborns and half-bloods who can't afford supplies. Work out the details, but make it substantive. He said it the way you say things you've already decided, not as a question. The rest we can manage properly later, once I understand the full picture. I'm not making major decisions about estates and investments at 11 years old in a ritual pool. Sharpclaw paused with his pen. Then he wrote something. As you direct. Ragnok was watching Harry with an expression he was no longer attempting to moderate. It was frank evaluation, and what was in it, Harry thought, was something like satisfaction, the satisfaction of a very long calculation finally resolving. There's the Longbottom inheritance, Harry said, moving to what had been bothering him since the water displayed the name. That one, there's a treaty bond, isn't there? From a long time ago. Not a lordship transfer, something else. Ragnok tilted his head. You felt that in the ritual. I felt something that felt like it wasn't entirely mine. More like, borrowed, or held in trust. Different from the others. The Potter-Longbottom Treaty of 1612, Ragnok said. An alliance bond between two family magical cores. In practice it means that certain branches of Longbottom family magic resonated so deeply with Potter family magic that the echo of the bond is present in your core. It is not theft. It is not an imposition. It is the residue of a very old friendship, formalized in magic. So I carry something that belongs to the Longbottom family. An echo. Not the thing itself. But Neville Longbottom, he's starting Hogwarts this year. He's in my year. Yes. And does he know about the treaty bond? The Longbottom family is aware of the treaty's existence. Whether young Mr. Longbottom has been told is a question for his grandmother. Harry filed that away. He'd need to talk to Neville. That was a conversation that required actual human speech, not a goblin ritual, but he wanted to get it right. The Dumbledore question, Harry said. He'd been circling it since the first room and now he walked up to it directly, because there was no point circling forever. He didn't file for inheritance information. All right. But when I get to Hogwarts, he's going to be there. He's going to have plans, I think. Ideas about what I'm supposed to do and who I'm supposed to be. How does Gringotts stand in relation to that? Ragnok straightened slightly. Gringotts is sovereign. Our authority over inheritance matters is not subject to override by any British wizard, regardless of their office. If Dumbledore attempts to access information about your inheritance, your vaults, or your lordship holdings, he will require either your explicit written permission or a goblin court order, which he will not receive. A pause. We are also, as of today, your formal magical guardians of record. The papers were filed during the ritual. The Ministry's record, Dumbledore's guardianship arrangement, has been superseded by Gringotts' prior claim as inheritance executor. Harry absorbed this. He's going to be angry. He is going to be inconvenienced, Ragnok said, with a precision that suggested he considered the distinction important. Whether he is angry is his own concern. There was a knock at the chamber door. One of the goblins opened it, spoke briefly with someone outside, and turned back with a message. Sharpclaw translated. It's nearly 9:30, he told Harry. The goblin transit to Hogsmeade will depart at 10:15. That gives you approximately 30 minutes for documentation. Harry nodded. Let's do the documentation. They moved back to the first chamber, the one with the table and the chairs that weren't quite the right size. The amber lamps felt the same as before, but Harry perceived them differently now. He could feel the warmth of the spellwork inside them, the functional design of the light, like reading the intent of the person who built something. He sat down in the human-sized chair and found that it was slightly more comfortable than it had been, which was probably psychological. Sharpclaw produced documents at a pace that suggested Gringotts ran on the principle that paperwork should move faster than the events it documented. Harry read each one before he signed it, which made Sharpclaw pause slightly the first time and then adjust his pace, laying each document down with a moment more care, the way you adjust when you realize the person across the table is actually reading and not just trusting. The documents were dense but not impenetrable. Gringotts' legal language was precise in a way that ministry documents weren't. It said what it meant and meant what it said, without the layers of qualification that legal language usually accumulated to protect the institution rather than the client. Harry appreciated that. He annealed, signed, and dated 15 Lordship declarations, an inheritance rider, a modified magical guardianship form, and something called a Convergent Lord Protocol, which was a set of standing instructions to Gringotts staff about how to handle communications related to his accounts and inheritance, and which had not been used in the bank's recorded history. He was signing the last of the Lordship declarations when the door opened. Not the door to the corridor. The other door, the impressive dark metal one with the runes that slid away from direct examination. It opened without being touched, swinging inward, and 2 goblin guards stepped in first, which told Harry immediately that someone important was on the other side. Dumbledore walked in. He was exactly as Harry remembered from the photographs he'd seen in the wizarding press, tall, ancient, robes of deep blue, half-moon spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken and healed at least once. Long silver beard. An air of absolute authority so practiced it had become invisible, the way very expensive furniture becomes invisible in a room that's always had it. He looked at Harry with an expression that was simultaneously warm and calculating, which Harry now perceived with a clarity that he hadn't had an hour ago. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was exactly what you'd expect, warm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had decided that seeming calm was the same as being right. "I came as soon as I was informed you'd been diverted." "I wasn't diverted," Harry said pleasantly. "I came voluntarily." He continued signing the document in front of him. Dumbledore's eyes moved from Harry to the rings, 15 of them, visible against Harry's hands as he held the pen. Something happened in the old man's expression. Very fast, very controlled, but it happened. He looked at Ragnok. "Director Ragnok," he said, with the careful courtesy of someone who knew the etiquette and was using it as a tool. "I was not aware an inheritance ritual had been scheduled." "It was not scheduled," Ragnok said. "It was necessitated. Mr. Potter collapsed at platform 9 3/4 due to a magical compression event caused by 11 years of inadequate environmental support." He let that last phrase sit in the room for a moment. "We responded appropriately." "I see." Dumbledore moved further into the room, hands clasped behind his back in the manner of someone who is very comfortable anywhere he goes. "And the ritual has been completed?" "Yes." "And the results are between Gringotts and our client," Ragnok said. Pleasantly. Absolutely without any flexibility at all. Dumbledore looked at Harry. "Harry, I wonder if we might sit down?" Harry said. He gestured to the empty chair across the table, the one meant for human proportions. "I've got one more signature. Give me a moment." He signed the last document and capped the pen. Then he looked at Dumbledore, who had sat, with the expression of a man choosing to interpret an invitation as an act of goodwill rather than what it actually was, which was a young person declining to be managed on their feet. "I expect," Harry said, "that you have concerns." "I have," Dumbledore said carefully, "a great many things I would like to discuss with you. In a more private setting. There are things you need to know, Harry, about your history, about my parents," Harry said. "The prophecy. Voldemort. The Philosopher's Stone, which is currently at Hogwarts inside something that's warded but probably not as well as it needs to be, given what I know about Quirrell." He watched Dumbledore's face through all of that, and he watched it carefully. "I've had an eventful morning." The silence in the room was the particular silence of a very experienced person recalibrating in real time. "How do you know about Quirinus Quirrell?" Dumbledore said, very quietly. I'd rather not get into that at Gringotts, Harry said. Some of it involves things I don't fully understand yet, and I'd prefer to understand them before I discuss them. He meant the Horcrux. He could feel it, the one inside himself, with a clarity that would have been terrifying an hour ago and which now was simply information. It was there. It was a problem. He would deal with it. Not today. But I'm not walking into Hogwarts without us being honest with each other about what we each know. Dumbledore studied him over his half-moon spectacles. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite what Harry had expected, not anger, not even the patient manipulation he'd half-braced for. What was there was something more genuine and more complicated. Something that looked, if Harry was reading it right, like grief. You are very different from what I expected, Dumbledore said. Quietly. I know, Harry said. Not unkindly. I think a lot of people made a lot of plans around what they expected. We'll work that out as we go. And the goblins, Dumbledore said, looking at Ragnok, are your formal magical guardians, Ragnok said. Superseding the Ministry's record, as per the inheritance executor claim filed 37 days after Harry's birth. He paused. Which you were aware existed. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. I was aware. And chose not to activate, Ragnok said. I had reasons, Dumbledore said, and he said it in the voice of a man who genuinely believes this, which Harry thought was probably the most complicated kind of person to navigate. Not a liar. A man who had made real decisions for what he genuinely believed were good reasons and had never been meaningfully required to examine them. I'm sure you did, Harry said. We can talk about them. At Hogwarts. I'm not angry. Which was mostly true. The anger was present but it was not in charge. But things are going to be different from whatever you'd planned. Not because I want to be difficult. Because I know what I am now, and pretending I don't isn't something I'm willing to do. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, no. I don't imagine it is. He rose. I will expect you at Hogwarts this evening. I'll be there, Harry said. Dumbledore moved toward the door. At the threshold he paused, a dramatic instinct so practiced it was probably unconscious. The rings, Harry. All 15. You should know, there will be people at Hogwarts, students and staff alike, who will react to them. I know, Harry said. You intend to wear them. They're mine, Harry said simply. Why wouldn't I? Another pause. Then Dumbledore said, not without warmth, and not without something that was genuinely complicated and might have been admiration, indeed. Why wouldn't you? He left. The door closed. Sharpclaw looked at Harry. That went better than I expected. He's not a bad man, Harry said. He was looking at the door. He's just someone who got very used to being the person who knew best and didn't notice when it stopped being true. He turned back to the table. Right. Transit at 10:15. What do I need to know before I get on the train? For the next 40 minutes, Ragnok and Sharpclaw briefed him. Not with the thoroughness of people burying someone in information, but with the efficiency of people who understood what a person needed to know immediately versus what could wait. The Wizengamot seats could be managed through proxy until he was of age. Ragnok would act as representative. The properties were in good condition, several of them had house elves in residence who had maintained them in the absence of their lord. The income streams from the 15 estates were healthy. The Convergent Lord Protocol meant that any magical contract offered to Harry would first require Gringotts review, a standard protection, but one that took on additional importance given his profile. Harry listened and asked specific, practical questions and did not pretend to understand things he didn't understand, which Ragnok seemed to appreciate considerably. At 10:10, one of the goblin guards appeared at the door with Hedwig's cage and Harry's trunk, both of which had been retrieved from the platform. Harry stood and accepted them, and he spoke briefly to Hedwig, who was in a state of contained affront at her mourning but who allowed him to stroke her feathers and click his tongue at her until she settled. "One thing," Harry said, turning back to Ragnok. "The Longbottom matter. The treaty bond." "Yes. Is there a copy of the original treaty I can read?" Sharpclaw produced a scroll from somewhere. It appeared to have been waiting. "We thought you might want it." Harry took the scroll and tucked it into his bag. He pulled the bag over his shoulder, took the handle of his trunk, and looked at Ragnok. "Thank you," he said. "For coming to the platform yourself." Ragnok held his gaze. The expression on the goblin's face was the expression of someone who has conducted inheritance rituals for centuries and who has just handled, for the first time in living memory, one that actually meant something to him personally. He inclined his head again, that small, precise acknowledgement. "Don't burn down your inheritance through ignorance," Ragnok said. "I'll do my best," Harry said. The Goblin transit line made the bank cart rides Harry remembered from his first visit look like a casual stroll. It moved at a speed that was less suggestive of travel and more suggestive of being strongly informed that you were somewhere else now and should adjust accordingly. The chamber walls blurred and vanished and were replaced by a tunnel that was more concept than architecture, and then with a sound like the world exhaling, Harry arrived in a small station under Hogsmeade Village with the particular certainty of someone who has just gone from one world to another without passing through the space between. He climbed the stairs into the late morning air of a Scottish village in September and stood there for a moment with his trunk and his owl and 15 lordship rings and 63 fewer magical blocks than he'd started the morning with. Somewhere up the hill, through forests that were older than the country's legal system, Hogwarts was waiting. Harry had never been to school before. Not really. He'd been to Stonewall, the comprehensive where Dudley and his friends had spent 3 years making the ordinary business of getting an education as miserable as possible, but that wasn't the same thing. This was different. This was a school that had been built for people like him, whatever like him meant, and whatever the shape of the people who'd planned his first year there, the school itself hadn't planned anything. It just was. He wanted to see it. He picked up his trunk and his owl and started walking. The road curved upward through trees that were just beginning to turn at their edges, gold creeping into green, the morning still cool enough to make the walk pleasant. No carriages, those wouldn't come until the students arrived on the train this evening. Just the road and the trees and the occasional sound of something large and unbothered moving in the forest, which Harry found interesting rather than alarming. He walked at an easy pace and thought about 15 names and what they meant and what they didn't mean and what Hogwarts would make of what he was. He thought about the Horcrux, too. It was there in the back of his consciousness like a splinter he was waiting for the right moment to address. He knew what it was. He'd known, in the way that the unsealed blocks gave him knowledge he hadn't studied, the bone-deep understanding of magical architecture and intent, the moment he turned inward during the ritual and felt the shape of everything inside him. The blocks, the rings, the vast landscape of his own inheritance. And in one corner of that landscape, small and cold and deeply wrong, something that was not him and had never been him, wearing his scar like a mask. He understood, now, what Voldemort had done and why and what the consequences were supposed to be. He understood it with a clarity that was not frightening so much as deeply clarifying. Voldemort's soul fragment was not welcome. It was sitting in a property that did not belong to it, and Harry was a convergent lord with 15 lordships and 63 newly unsealed blocks of magical capability, and he was very reasonably confident that the ledger of power in that particular arrangement was not in Voldemort's favor. He'd deal with it. Carefully, because careful was warranted, but without the particular paralysis that fear produces when you don't know what you're afraid of. He knew now. Knowledge changed the shape of things. The castle appeared over the tree-line suddenly, without preamble, the way genuinely large things appear, not gradually but all at once, when you turn the right corner. Harry stopped on the road and looked up at it. Hogwarts was enormous. It was also alive in a way that he could feel from here, a warmth from its direction, a magical signature larger than anything he'd encountered, including the ritual chamber, including the transit line, including all of it. A castle with 1,000 years of magic woven into its stones, wards layered on wards on wards, built and added to and reinforced by every generation that had passed through it. He could feel it noticing him. Not metaphorically. Not as imagination. The wards, the outermost layer of Hogwarts' considerable defenses, turned their attention toward him the way a very old person in a crowded room turns toward a particular voice they've been waiting to hear. Recognition without surprise. The kind of greeting a place gives to something that belongs there. Harry stood on the road and let it happen and felt the castle's acknowledgement settle around him like a key finding its lock. Then he picked up his trunk and kept walking. He had classes to sign up for, a castle to explore, a sorting ceremony to survive, a Horcrux to plan around, a Quirrell situation to navigate, a conversation with Neville Longbottom to have, and at some point someone was going to have to explain to him how Quidditch worked. He decided, genuinely looking forward to it. Chapter 3, The Train That Knows Your Name. Hogsmeade in September was the kind of quiet that only exists in places that are usually loud. The village proper sat at the foot of the hill below the castle, all crooked chimneys and shop fronts with hand-lettered signs, and at this hour, mid-morning, hours before the express would arrive from London, the streets were nearly empty. A witch in green robes was sweeping her front step. A cat observed Harry's passage from a garden wall with the professional disinterest of someone whose job is observation and who has seen enough to stop being impressed. Harry had found the Hogsmeade station by following the train tracks, which was not elegant navigation but was effective. The station itself was a single-platform affair, more charming than functional, a peaked wooden roof and a notice board with no notices currently posted. He'd left his trunk in the station master's office, which was unlocked and clearly accustomed to receiving things that needed minding, and then he'd walked back into the village and found a small tea room that was open and ordered the largest breakfast on the menu and eaten all of it with the focused attention of someone who had not eaten since the previous evening and had spent the morning having their fundamental nature restructured. Then he sat with the scroll Sharpclaw had given him, the Potter Longbottom Treaty of 1612, and read it twice. The language was old but not impenetrable, once you understood that the formal phrasing was just formality around a relatively simple idea. Two families, both established in the wizarding world, both with children who had grown up together, had formalized their friendship in magic. Not a political alliance, not a business arrangement, a friendship bond, documented because the magical cores of the two family heads resonated so closely that they'd begun to affect each other in ways that warranted recording. The treaty acknowledged the resonance, established that it was mutual and voluntary, and documented that whatever magic passed between the lines as a result was held in trust, not owned. Harry set the scroll down and drank his tea. A friendship so deep it left a mark in the blood. And 400 years later, the echo of it was living in his chest. He thought about what he knew of Neville Longbottom, which was almost nothing, a name in his mental file, also starting Hogwarts, possibly the other prophecy child, which Ragnok had mentioned briefly and which Harry had stored for later. He'd need to approach that carefully. Not because he was worried about Neville's reaction, but because it was someone else's family history and deserved to be handled with the same respect he'd want given to his own. He finished his tea, left a generous tip in Muggle coins that he hoped were somehow acceptable, and went back to the station to wait. The Hogwarts Express arrived at Platform 3 of Hogsmeade Station at precisely 7 minutes past 2, which suggested it had left London late and made up some time, which was the kind of detail Harry now noticed automatically and wished he could sometimes turn off. The locomotive came around the bend in the tracks breathing steam and purpose, the red paint bright even in the soft September afternoon light, and it pulled in with the solidity of something that had done this run so many times the tracks had memory. Students began pouring off immediately, the way they always do when a contained space full of young people finally opens, an organized chaos of trunks and animals and voices overlapping, older students navigating with practiced efficiency, first years recognizable by the way they moved, which was slightly slower and slightly more overwhelmed, taking in the village and the hint of the castle on the hill above with the expression of people who have arrived somewhere they can't quite believe is real. Harry sat on the low stone wall of the station platform and watched them come. He wasn't trying to hide, but he also wasn't standing in the middle of things waving, and the result was that he'd been watching for a few minutes before anyone noticed him. The first person who did was a girl, bushy-haired and bright-eyed, with a book tucked under one arm even now, as if she'd been reading on the train and had simply failed to put it down when they arrived. She stopped when she saw him. Or rather, she stopped when she saw his hands. The rings caught the afternoon light and she looked at them with the expression of someone whose mental database has been queried and returned a result that requires verification. "Those are Lordship rings," she said, by way of greeting. "They are," Harry said. "You're wearing 15 of them." "I am." She processed this. The most Lordship rings anyone has held simultaneously in recorded wizarding history is 3. Aldrich Moon's field in 1687, and that was only because 2 of them were disputed and the dispute took 50 years to resolve. She paused. "I read Wizarding Inheritances and their legal implications on the train." "Was it good?" "Very thorough." She shifted the book under her arm. "I'm Hermione Granger." "Harry Potter." Her expression did the thing expressions do when a name resolves into a person. She'd known he existed, clearly, had known he was starting Hogwarts this year. But she hadn't connected it. She looked at his forehead, where the fringe of his hair covered his scar, and then deliberately back at his face. "You're wearing 15 Lordship rings and you fainted on the platform this morning," she said. "I heard someone talking about it on the train. They said a first year passed out and got taken by goblins." "Both accurate," Harry said. "Are you all right?" "Better than I was this morning." He paused. "Significantly better, actually." She tilted her head slightly, reading him the way someone reads a text for the information between the words. "You went to Gringotts?" "Yes." "And she gestured at the rings. Inheritance ritual." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, which Harry suspected was unusual for her. Something was happening in her expression, the rapid reconfiguration of someone whose understanding of the world has just been updated with data that requires significant reorganization. It wasn't distress, exactly. It was more like the look of someone presented with a much more interesting problem than the one they'd been working on. "That's extraordinary," she said, and she said it in the tone of someone for whom extraordinary was not a compliment but a technical classification. "I know," Harry said. "Can I sit down?" He moved along the wall to make room. They sat side by side watching the rest of the students stream off the train and organize themselves into carriages. Hermione, it turned out, had read approximately twice the required reading list and had then continued into supplementary texts, which Harry found genuinely interesting rather than competitive. She knew things he didn't know. She also knew them in the way you know things from books, which was a different thing from knowing them the way he'd come to know things this morning, embedded, contextual, part of a lived understanding rather than a catalogued one. He liked her immediately, which surprised him a little. "The treaty between the Potter and Longbottom families," Harry said, testing. 1612, "do you know anything about it?" She went still in the way people go still when they know something and are checking whether they know enough to speak confidently about it. "Only what's in Genealogical Magic of the Founding Families, which mentions it in a footnote. It's considered a historical oddity, one of the few friendship bonds documented in the 17th century. Most family magical treaties from that period were economic." She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Neville Longbottom is starting Hogwarts this year." "I know. I met him on the train. He lost his toad twice and found it twice, which I thought showed reasonable persistence." She paused. "And you're connected to his family through the treaty bond." "There's an echo of it in my inheritance. I want to handle it correctly." He was watching the train, where a knot of students had gathered around a compartment door, probably sorting out whose trunk was whose. "Do you know anything about him?" "He's nervous," Hermione said, with the directness of someone who has no patience for indirection when directness is available. "He's been told his magic is weak because he struggled to show it as a child, and he's internalized that, and it's wrong. You can see it in how he holds himself. He apologizes before he's done anything worth apologizing for. Harry looked at her. You worked all that out from a Toad situation on a train? I worked that out from watching him for 3 hours. She said it without apology. People are usually more legible than they think. Harry thought about how he'd read Ragnok's breathing pattern this morning, the mineral composition of ritual chamber stones, the rune architecture of the corridor. Yes, he said. They are. They found Neville near the end of the platform, working up the courage to approach a carriage. He was round-faced and earnest and was currently holding his Toad, Trevor, Harry would learn, who had a philosophical approach to being held that suggested he had long since accepted his circumstances, with the careful grip of someone who has lost the same animal twice and is not interested in a third time. Neville Longbottom? Harry said. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone expecting to be told they've done something wrong. Then he looked at Harry's hands, and the rings, and his expression changed into something more complex. You're Harry Potter, Neville said. Yeah. This is Hermione Granger. Can we share a carriage? Yes? Neville said, with the slightly surprised inflection of someone who has not often been sought out and is not sure about the etiquette. They climbed into the carriage. The thestrals that pulled it were invisible to all 3 of them, which Harry noted with a compartment of his mind and left for later. The carriage moved, and Hogwarts Castle came into full view as they crested the hill, and all 3 of them went quiet for the same reason. It was one thing to see it from the road. It was another to see it from the approach, lit by the early evening sun, towers rising above the tree-line, windows lit gold, the lake beside it catching the sky. It was the most magical thing Harry had seen all day, and he had seen genuinely extraordinary things. Blimey, Neville said softly. Harry smiled. Yeah. The carriages crossed the bridge and moved through the gates, and Harry felt the wards again, more strongly now, more detailed. He could read layers in them the way you read geology in cliffsides, centuries of spellwork compressed and stacked. Here was the original founder's warding. Here were Flemish modifications from the 15th century. Here were more recent additions, some of them Dumbledore's, efficient and careful. And here, woven through all of it, was something he recognized by quality if not by name, something responsive, something aware, the core intelligence of the castle's magic, old as the stones. It felt him coming through the gate. The warmth he'd felt from the road became a specific acknowledgement, more detailed than before, and then, so suddenly it was startling, it was as if the castle breathed. Harry felt the breath of it in his chest, the resonance of 15 dormant lordship claims recognized by a structure that had been built partly by people who'd held those claims. Are you all right? Hermione said, watching him. The castle, Harry said. What about it? It recognized me. She looked at the castle, then back at him, working out whether that was metaphor. Literally? Literally. Its wards have a responsive layer. They identify incoming magical signatures against their records. He paused. I apparently have records. Neville was looking at him with an expression that was trying to calibrate where on the spectrum from extremely impressive to should I be worried this conversation fell. The carriages stopped at the entrance steps. Students poured out and moved up the steps and through the great oak doors into the entrance hall, which opened before them in the particular splendor of a space designed to remind young people that they had arrived somewhere that expected things of them. A marble staircase. Torches. The distant sound of the great hall beyond the double doors. They were met by Professor McGonagall, who was exactly what her reputation suggested, a woman whose precision was a form of respect, who expected better because she genuinely believed better was available. She gathered the first years with the efficient authority of someone who had done this 40-odd times and still cared about doing it properly. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly, she told them, and told them what they needed to know without excess. Wait here, follow when called, behave as if this matters. Because it does. Harry stood with the cluster of first years and looked around the entrance hall. He picked out Draco Malfoy from across the room, pale, assured, surrounded by the two large boys who functioned as both friends and audience, wearing the expression of someone who had been told they were important so many times that telling had become invisible to them. Malfoy was looking at Harry with the undisguised curiosity of someone who has been expecting this meeting and has prepared remarks. He crossed the hall. "Harry Potter," Malfoy said. He said it the way you present a card, as an opening, as a statement of knowing. "I'm Draco Malfoy." He extended his hand. Harry shook it. Malfoy blinked. He'd clearly expected either reluctance or eagerness, not the simple equanimity of a person who has had considerably more important meetings today and is treating this one at its actual value. "The rings," Malfoy said, looking at Harry's hands. His composure flickered. He recovered quickly, but not quite quickly enough. "Those are Lordship rings," Harry said. "Yes." "How many?" "I count." Malfoy was doing the count and arriving at a number that his education had apparently told him was impossible. "That's 15, Harry said. The air around Malfoy recalibrated. He was not a stupid boy, Harry could see that clearly enough. He was a boy who had been given a very specific map of the wizarding world and was now looking at terrain that wasn't on it. Points of orientation he'd been certain of, like Harry Potter being a manageable unknown who could be befriended or dismissed on Malfoy's terms, were suddenly more complicated. 15 lordships, Malfoy said. Yes. A pause. Which ones? Potter, Peverell, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw. Malfoy's carefully assembled composure did something involuntary at Slytherin. Longbottom adjacent, Flammel, Black. Malfoy said, and this time composure went out the window entirely, replaced by something that looked genuinely unmoored. The Black Lordship? That's, my mother is a Black. That would make you. We can work out the family tree later, Harry said, not unkindly. There's a sorting ceremony about to happen. Malfoy stared at him. Then he pulled himself together with visible effort, because whatever else he had been trained to maintain appearances, and he was deploying that training now as a genuine tool rather than an affectation. Right, he said. Of course. He withdrew. Harry watched him go back to his companions, who immediately wanted to know what had been said, and watched Malfoy's expression as he fielded their questions with something less than his usual confidence. That was interesting, Hermione said, from beside him. He's not as sure of himself as he wants to be, Harry said. He was trained to expect the world to be arranged a certain way. It's not arranged that way. He's figuring out what that means. Most people would be crowing about outranking him. Most people haven't just spent a morning finding out they're a convergent lord, Harry said. It puts things in perspective. He watched the hall. He might be fine, actually. Or he might not be. I don't think he's decided yet. McGonagall returned and the first years were led through the doors into the Great Hall. Harry had anticipated this moment, had thought about it on the walk up the hill, on the carriage ride, in the entrance hall. The Great Hall was famous enough that everyone who arrived at Hogwarts had already built a version of it in their imagination. The candles. The 4 long tables. The enchanted ceiling. What he hadn't anticipated was the way the room felt. It was the densest ambient magic he'd encountered outside of Gringotts itself, not structured and purposeful the way the ritual chamber had been, but layered, organic, the accumulation of 1,000 years of magic lived in this room. Every meal eaten here, every celebration, every conversation, every spell cast in its range, all of it had settled into the stones the way experience settles into a person, becoming part of the texture of the place. And as Harry walked through the doors, the hall noticed. It wasn't subtle. The candles, all 500 of them, floating above the house tables in their clusters, flickered simultaneously. A single, brief shiver of light across the entire ceiling, and then steadied. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Most of the students at the house tables, deep in their own conversations, missed it entirely. The first years didn't miss it, because the first years were looking. What was that? Neville whispered, from directly behind Harry. Me, probably, Harry said quietly. Sorry. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the room, old and patched and entirely self-possessed. When the last first year had filed in and the hall was quiet, it opened what could generously be called its brim in what was clearly its mouth, and sang. Harry listened to the song with the particular attention he'd been paying to everything since the ritual, not just the words, but the magic inside them. The Sorting Hat was genuinely extraordinary. It was a millennium of accumulated consciousness, an intelligence grown from sustained proximity to magic and minds, and it sang about the founders and their houses with the authority of someone who had been there. When the song ended, McGonagall began calling names. The first years went up one by one. Harry watched the hat's process, each placement deliberate, some faster than others, some involving a visible conversation. The hat took nearly 3 minutes with a girl named Abbott, which made her look deeply anxious by the time it finally shouted Hufflepuff. Malfoy went to Slytherin in about 4 seconds, the hat barely touching his head before it had decided. Hermione went to Gryffindor to audible approval from the Gryffindor table, sat down with the precise satisfaction of someone who expected this result and is pleased to have it confirmed. Neville went up. The hat sat on his head for a long time. Harry watched. Neville was gripping the edge of the stool with both hands, eyes closed, and Harry could see the moment when something in him relaxed, not from fear resolving, but from being heard. Whatever the hat had said, it had said something that mattered. When Gryffindor was called, Neville's face had a quality that Harry recognized, the quality of someone who has been told something true about themselves for the first time. Potter, Harry. The hall was already quiet. It got quieter. Harry walked up to the stool and sat down, and the Sorting Hat was placed on his head. Darkness. The close, dusty, ancient quality of something very old and very intelligent paying full attention. Then a voice, directly in his ear, that was not quite sound and not quite thought. "Oh," said the hat. It said it the way you say, "oh," when you open a door expecting a supply closet and find an ocean on the other side. Harry waited. "I have sorted 112 years of students," the hat said. "I have put 11-year-olds into 4 categories based on their dominant traits, their potential, their hidden depths, their fears. I have been wrong twice. I have been right many thousands of times. I know the shape of a Gryffindor. I know the cunning of a Slytherin. I know a Ravenclaw by the quality of their curiosity. I know a Hufflepuff by the warmth of their loyalty. You," said the hat, "are all 4 simultaneously, and I am not sure what to do with that." "Put me somewhere," Harry said, "in his head. You carry Gryffindor's actual blood. And Slytherin's. And Ravenclaw's. And through your mother's loyalty and your own capacity for it, something profoundly Hufflepuff. These are not tendencies. These are literal inheritances. You are not someone who has traits of 4 houses. You are someone 4 houses exist partially because of." "That's very interesting," Harry said. "But I still need a table to sit at." A pause. Then the hat did something Harry hadn't expected, it laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet, specific amusement of something very old encountering something genuinely new. "Where would you like to sit?" "Gryffindor," Harry said, without hesitation. "My parents were Gryffindors. My dad, my mum. That matters to me. You could make a strong case for any house. I'm not making a case. I'm telling you where I want to sit." Another pause, brief and thoughtful. "The castle agreed with your choice before you sat down," the hat observed. "I'm not sure that's ever happened. Usually it waits for me." There was something like warmth in the hat's voice now. "Very well, Harry Potter. Very well." It raised its brim and shouted, not called, not announced, shouted, with a volume and enthusiasm that Harry suspected was not its usual register. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table's reaction was not the polite enthusiastic applause of a welcome. It was the sudden, explosive noise of 200 people deciding simultaneously that this was a moment worth responding to. Even the teacher's table reacted. Harry glimpsed McGonagall pressing her lips together in the expression of someone suppressing a smile. He glimpsed Dumbledore, who was watching Harry with an expression both proud and measuring. He glimpsed Quirrell, who was watching Harry with an expression that was neither of those things. Harry looked at Quirrell for exactly as long as it took to confirm what he already knew. The Horcrux inside himself recognized the one inside Quirrell the way one cold thing recognizes another across a warm room. A signature. A flavor of wrongness that was distinctly Voldemort's. He filed it and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Hermione, who immediately said, "The hall's candles flickered when you came in." "I noticed," Harry said. "And the hat took longer with you than usual." "A little." "What did it say?" "It said it wasn't sure what to do with me." She considered this. "I can see why," she said, which was the most Hermione thing she had said so far and which Harry found oddly comforting. The feast appeared, not brought in, simply there, the tablecloth suddenly bearing more food than any reasonable gathering needed. Harry ate and talked and listened. The boy on his other side was Ron Weasley, one of the red-haired family from the platform, who turned out to have the specific energy of someone who has been the youngest for too long and had developed opinions about absolutely everything as a result. He talked about Quidditch with the enthusiasm of someone delivering information critical to survival. He talked about the castle, having visited several times while his older brothers were students, with the proprietary air of someone who considers familiarity ownership. He talked about Harry, briefly, in the way people talk about you when they're sitting next to you and have not quite adjusted to the proximity. "Fred and George said you got taken by goblins this morning," Ron said, helping himself to more potatoes. "At the platform. I fainted and then I went to Gringotts voluntarily," Harry said. "Why did you faint?" "Too much magic compressed into too small a space." Ron looked at this from several angles. "Is that a thing that happens?" "Apparently it can." Harry pulled the platter of chicken across. "It's fine now." They sorted it. Ron's gaze dropped to the rings in the automatic way everyone's gaze dropped to the rings, and his expression did the thing that expressions did when the count arrived at 15 and refused to make sense. "Those are, how many?" 15, Harry said. Ron put his fork down. 15, he said. "Yes." "Lordship rings." "Yes." "My dad works at the ministry," Ron said, in the tone of someone supplying context. "He deals with magical inheritance law sometimes. He's talked about, I've never heard him mention anyone with more than 2. He picked his fork back up. 15, he said again, to himself, and resumed eating with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has grown up in a house full of magic and has learned that being surprised has diminishing returns. Harry liked him immediately, in a different way than he liked Hermione and a different way than he liked Neville. Ron was straightforward in a way that had nothing to do with simplicity. He was observant and funny and deeply loyal to his own code, which was generous even if he didn't always know it. "Quidditch," Harry said. "Tell me how it works." Ron brightened considerably. "Right, so there are 3 types of balls." Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was eating with the careful attention of someone processing information they haven't fully resolved. He glanced at Harry twice during the feast, each time with something different in his expression. Harry noticed both glances and returned neither, not from hostility but because he was busy listening to Ron explain the offside rules of a sport played on broomsticks, which required attention. Dumbledore's after-feast speech was brief and warm and contained a few warnings: the third-floor corridor, the forest, that Harry listened to with the specific interest of someone who now understood that warnings from Dumbledore sometimes contained more information than their surface suggested. The third floor. Something that was presumably guarding the Philosopher's Stone, which Hagrid had moved from Gringotts on Dumbledore's instructions. Harry filed the location, filed the connection to Quirrell, and decided the third floor could wait until he understood more. After the feast, McGonagall led the Gryffindor first years through the castle to the tower, and Harry paid attention to the route with a different kind of focus than the other students. The castle was speaking to him in a low, continuous register, not words, more like warmth and direction, like a hand on a shoulder, like the feeling of being somewhere you are supposed to be. A portrait on the second floor turned its head as Harry passed. An elderly wizard in oils, who had been mid-conversation with a witch in the adjacent frame, broke off what he was saying and looked at Harry directly. "Potter," the painted wizard said, in a tone of absolute recognition. "About time." Harry stopped. The stream of students moved around him. "Sorry," he said. "Cadmus Moffat," the portrait said. "Architect of the Eastern Wards. I've been waiting for someone with a genuine lordship claim to come through. There are rooms on this floor that only open for the heir. Third door from the left in the west corridor, it'll know you." "Thank you," Harry said. "Don't let Peeves in," Moffat added. "He knows about the room. Long-standing grievance." "Don't ask." Harry moved on. He caught up with the first years at the portrait of the fat lady, who gave them the password, Caput Draconis, with the cheerful authority of someone who has done this for decades and enjoys it thoroughly. The common room beyond was warm and red and exactly like every description Harry had ever read of it, which made it no less affecting. First years spread out to examine things. Ron immediately claimed a chair near the fire. Hermione went to the bookshelf, predictably. Neville found a spot near the window and stood looking out at the grounds, which were lit now by the moon. Harry crossed to him. "Neville," he said. Neville turned. "Hi." He still had Trevor. The toad appeared to be sleeping. "Can I tell you something? It's about your family." Neville's expression became careful in the way that expressions do when you've learned that conversation about your family sometimes leads somewhere painful. "All right." Harry told him about the treaty. Not all of it at once, not with the full legal detail. He had the scroll, which he'd carry to Neville later. He told him the shape of it. Two families whose magic resonated so closely they'd felt like extensions of each other. A friendship documented in blood and spell. An echo that had survived 4 centuries. Neville listened. His expression moved through several things Harry watched carefully, surprise, and then something more complicated, and then something that was trying not to be hope and losing the fight. "So the Potter and Longbottom families were," he started. "Friends," Harry said. "Real ones. In the magic goes down the bloodline way." "Gran never talked about that," Neville said. "She might not know the detail of it. The treaty's in Gringotts records. I have a copy." Harry paused. "I wanted you to know because there's an echo of that bond in my core, from the ritual today. It's not mine and I carry it with respect. I thought you deserved to know it exists." Neville was quiet for a moment. Trevor shifted in his hands. Outside, the grounds were silver and dark. "My magic has always felt," Neville started, then stopped. "Like it wasn't quite where it was supposed to be?" Harry said. Neville looked at him. "Yeah. Exactly like that. I think some of it resonates with mine. Not wrong, just looking for the frequency it matches. It might settle better being around someone carrying the other half of a bond it was built to complete." Harry shrugged. "I'm not certain of that. But it makes sense mechanically." Something in Neville's posture changed. Not dramatically, not the transformation of a confident person, nothing so instant. But the quality of the change was real. The shoulders that had carried the apology of his presence straightened by a fraction, and that fraction felt significant. "Thank you," Neville said. "For telling me. The scroll is in my bag. Have a look whenever you want." Harry moved away and let Neville have the window. He sat in an armchair near the fire, not Ron's, but one adjacent, and looked at the common room and thought about the day. It was 9:30 in the evening and he had been awake since 5 in the morning, and he had fainted on a train platform and undergone a major inheritance ritual and met the director of the Goblin Nation and spoken with Dumbledore and ridden the Goblin Transit to Hogsmeade and walked up the hill and eaten 2 large meals and been sorted and had 4 significant conversations and learned things about himself that would require weeks to fully absorb. He was tired in a way that went down to the bone. Not exhausted. The magic was still buzzing, a low warm hum throughout his system, the 63 unsealed blocks still settling, still finding their places like water finding its level. But tired. He looked at his hands. The 15 rings. The fire popped. Hermione appeared beside him and sat in the adjacent chair without asking, which he appreciated. She opened her book. Then she closed it. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the stone," she said quietly, making sure only he could hear. She'd read Hogwarts, a history, clearly, and whatever else she'd read on the train. There's something being guarded at Hogwarts. Something that was moved from Gringotts. And Quirrell, yes, Harry said. "You know about him." "I know something is wrong with him. I noticed at dinner." Hermione looked at him. "How?" Harry considered how to answer that. "Voldemort's signature," he said, very quietly. "I can recognize it. He touched his scar, briefly, not dramatically. "From this." Hermione absorbed this with the expression of someone whose model of the world is updating in real time. "You can sense Horcruxes." Harry looked at her. "You know what Horcruxes are?" "I read the dark arts defined and detailed, which the Hogwarts library supposedly has in the restricted section, but my parents took me to Flourish and Blots twice and I may have been thorough." She didn't look remotely apologetic. "It was the darkest chapter. Soul magic. The theory is genuinely frightening." "The theory is accurate," Harry said. "More than the book probably specifies." She studied him. "You carry one." He met her eyes. She held his gaze without flinching, which told him something important about her. "Yes," he said. "Is that," she started, and he could see her calibrating between what she wanted to ask and what was appropriate to ask. "It's not permanent," Harry said. "I know what it is. I know how to address it. Not tonight, not this week, but it's not. I'm not afraid of it." He said this with the flat certainty of someone who has had a morning that restructured their relationship with fear. "It's a problem I intend to solve." She was quiet. "All right," she said. "All right? You're clearly more capable than anyone I've met," she said, with the directness she applied to everything. "And you've apparently thought about this more than I have, which is not a state I intend to remain in for long. So, all right." She opened her book again. "I'm going to read about Hogwarts defensive magic for an hour and then I'm going to sleep, and tomorrow I'm going to start actually learning things, and I suggest you do the same." Harry looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the fire. "I have a room to find," he said, remembering the portrait's message. "A ward room. 3rd door, west corridor, 2nd floor. Can I come?" He thought about it. "Yes," he said. They slipped out of the common room at 11, when the remaining students had cleared, the portrait hole swinging shut behind them. The castle at night was different from the castle at dusk. The torches burned lower, the portraits dozed or chatted quietly among themselves, and the stone had a different quality of warmth, as if it relaxed when the day's density of human activity settled. Harry knew where the west corridor was. He knew it the way he knew the route to the kitchen at Privet Drive in the dark, not because he'd been told, but because the castle had been murmuring directions in a register below conscious thought since he'd walked through its gates. He led them down a corridor and around a turn and found the 3rd door on the left. It was an ordinary door. Or it appeared to be, no carvings, no unusual keyhole, no visible magical distinction from the doors on either side. Harry looked at it for a moment. Then he put his hand flat against it. The warmth was immediate and specific, recognition, the quality of a door meeting the person it was built for. The lock turned without a key, without a spell, without anything except contact, and the door swung inward. The room beyond was not large. Shelves along the walls, holding journals and rolled documents and objects Harry couldn't immediately identify. A work table in the center. And on one shelf, clearly the shelf that had been waiting, a row of 7 books with spines that read not with titles but with family names. Potter. Peveril. Gryffindor. 7 of his 15 lordships had kept records here. A room for exactly this, a convergent lord, arriving when the castle's magic had long enough accumulated that it was ready. Reading, study, the work of understanding what you were. Hermione stepped in and looked at the shelves and then turned back to Harry with an expression that, for the first time all day, had dropped all its academic composure and was simply honest. "Harry," she said. "I know," he said. "This has been here waiting. For someone with the right inheritance, apparently. For a while." He moved to the shelf. He ran his finger along the spines without taking any of them down. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, there would be time. We should sleep. We absolutely should sleep, she agreed, neither of them moving. They stayed another 10 minutes, just looking, because sometimes the appropriate response to something that has been waiting a very long time is to let it know you've arrived. When they left, the door locked itself behind them with a sound that Harry thought was probably the castle equivalent of satisfaction. Chapter 4. What the Castle Remembers. Harry woke at 5:40 in the morning to the sound of rain against stone and the particular quality of silence that belongs to a building full of sleeping people. The dormitory was dark, the curtains around the other 4 beds still drawn, the only light a thin grey line at the window edge where the September dawn was making its first tentative offer. He lay still for a moment and took inventory. The 63 unsealed blocks had settled further overnight. He could feel the difference, the magic distributed more evenly through his system, less like flood water finding its channels and more like a river that had found its bed. Some of the knowledge that had arrived as immediate understanding the previous morning had deepened overnight. The way things you learn before sleep are more solid in the morning, integrated rather than just received. He understood things he hadn't had words for yesterday. The architecture of the wardroom's shelving. The specific resonance of the Founder's magic in the castle stones. The precise nature of what Voldemort had done when he split his soul, which was more technically deranged than even Hermione's restricted section book had suggested. He got up. He dressed quietly, took his bag, the Longbottom treaty scroll was still in it, and went downstairs to the common room, which was empty except for the fire, which had burned low overnight and was making a half-hearted attempt at revival. He sat in the chair by the fire and thought about his day. First priority, the wardroom books. He needed to understand the full scope of what those records contained before he made any decisions about the Horcrux situation. Second, Quirrell. Not action, not yet, but understanding. The man's schedule, his habits, his access to the 3rd floor. What exactly Voldemort's presence inside him meant for Quirrell as a person, separate from Voldemort as a threat. Third, the people around him. Hermione, who was already thinking about the stone and would be a genuine asset if he let her. Neville, who was carrying 11 years of bad information about his own capabilities. Ron, who was perceptive in ways he didn't give himself credit for. He had not been at Hogwarts 24 hours and he already had 3 concurrent problems and 4 people he was actively choosing to be responsible toward. He found this more energizing than overwhelming, which probably said something about him. The fire crackled. He pulled out the Longbottom scroll and read it a 3rd time, looking for details he'd missed. Found one, a clause near the end about the bond's maintenance requirements, which specified that the resonance between the 2 family lines needed periodic proximity to remain stable. Not proximity in the magical ritual sense, just being near each other. Having meals together. The kind of proximity that friendship naturally produced. The treaty had essentially formalized, in legal terms, the idea that some bonds needed tending. He rolled the scroll up and was thinking about that when the fire popped and a voice said from above his left shoulder, "Early riser." "Good." Harry looked up. The portrait on the wall above the fireplace, which he had not paid particular attention to last night, it being one of many, showed a woman in Elizabethan dress with silver hair and sharp eyes that were very much awake despite the hour. "Good morning," Harry said. "Heloise Macmillan," the portrait said. "I've been in this common room since 1612. 378 years of Gryffindors. You are the most interesting arrival in approximately 2 centuries, which I intend to mean as a genuine compliment." "Thank you," Harry said. "Can portraits move between frames?" "Yes, within the castle network. Though it depends enormously on how well you know the other portraits and whether they'll let you through." She studied him. "The castle told the portraits about you last night." "Not in words, it doesn't use words. More like a change in the light. Moffat apparently spoke to you on the 2nd floor. He told me about the ward room." "He's been waiting to tell someone that for 60 years, Heloise said." He was beside himself. She settled in her painted chair. "What do you want to know?" Harry considered her. "What does the castle remember?" She tilted her head. "Specific question. You've been here since 1612. You said the castle communicates. What has it told you about what it remembers?" A pause, not reluctant, but the pause of someone organizing something large into a manageable sequence. "The castle was built by 4 people who were extraordinary individually and catastrophic together," Heloise said. "Not because they hated each other, that came later, in the histories that made a good story out of a complicated friendship. Because they were each so certain their particular understanding was the whole picture. Gryffindor thought courage was sufficient. Slytherin thought strategy was sufficient. Ravenclaw thought knowledge was sufficient. Hufflepuff was the one who understood they were all wrong and said so constantly and was ignored constantly because she was too kind to be frightening." She looked at Harry steadily. "The castle remembers all 4 of them because all 4 of them built it. It was never meant to have houses that competed. It was meant to have houses that completed each other. But it's been running as competition for 1,000 years, Harry said. "Yes. And it's been trying to correct that for 1,000 years. Very slowly. Very patiently. The way old things are patient." She folded her painted hands. "You carrying all 4 founders' lines is not an accident, from the castle's perspective. It's been arranging for that outcome for a very long time." Harry sat with that. "The castle arranged for it." "The castle is 1,000 years old and has opinions," Heloise said. "I wouldn't underestimate the opinions of something that old." He thought about the Sorting Hat choosing Gryffindor at his request. The wards recognizing him at the gate. The ward room opening. The candles. Does it want something from me?" "It wants what it's always wanted," she said. "Someone who understands what it was built to be. What you do with that is your business." She tilted her head at the window. "The rain is clearing. The grounds are nice in the early morning. Particularly the greenhouses. Professor Sprout comes in at 6, and she is a person worth knowing." Harry stood. He looked at the portrait for a moment. "Thank you, Heloise." She waved a painted hand. "Come back when you have more questions. I have nowhere to be." He found the greenhouses by following the smell of wet earth through the lower door and across the lawn, his shoes damp by the time he reached the glass-pane structures at the edge of the grounds. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, the Scottish morning cool enough to show his breath, and through the greenhouse glass he could see the warm green interior and the movement of someone who was already working. Pomona Sprout was abroad, comfortable woman with earth permanently embedded in her fingernails and the look of someone who had made peace with the fact that dignity and gardening were incompatible and had chosen gardening without regret. She was repotting something that appeared to have strong feelings about the process, wearing thick dragon hide gloves and talking to it quietly, which struck Harry as entirely reasonable. He tapped the glass. She looked up, assessed him without alarm, and waved him in. The greenhouse was warm and smelled of green things and damp soil. Harry looked around at the plants, some recognizable, some decidedly not, several that appeared to be watching him with more attention than plants generally managed. A fat purple thing in the corner tracked his movement like a slow sunflower. He didn't find it unsettling. He found it interesting. "You're the Potter boy," Sprout said, not stopping her work. "Heard you had a dramatic start yesterday." "A little, yeah." He moved to the workbench. "Can I help?" She glanced at him sideways. "Can you? Have you worked with plants before?" "I did most of the gardening at my aunt and uncle's. She's particular about her garden." He looked at the plant in the pot, which was a deep, purplish green and had what appeared to be opinions about its new soil. "What does it want?" Sprout stopped. "Sorry?" "The plant. It's pulling away from the left side of the pot." Does it prefer drainage from the right, or is that side too?" He looked more carefully. "Too warm. The heat vents closer on the left." Sprout looked at the plant. Looked at the heat vent. Looked at Harry. "How did you?" she started. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. "I just noticed." He could feel the plants in the greenhouse the way he'd been feeling everything since the ritual, their magical signatures subtle and intricate, each one with a specific quality. The purple thing was the most magically dense. The repotted plant was stressed, its signature flickering. "I think it's fine. Just needs a moment to settle." Sprout put her gloved hands on her hips and studied him for a long moment. Then she handed him a spare pair of gloves. "Right. Move it 6 inches to the right and pack the soil on the left side a bit looser. Let it breathe." He did. The plant's agitation settled almost immediately, the slight tremor in its leaves quieting. Said Sprout. She sounded pleased. "You'll be good in herbology." "I'd like to be," Harry said. They worked for an hour, during which Sprout told him more about magical plants than he would learn in 2 weeks of class, because she was a person who loved her subject and rarely had students who were awake at 6 in the morning and actually interested rather than just early. She talked about the magical properties of things he repotted, the way certain plants stored ambient magic and released it under stress, the long and complicated relationship between herbology and potions that neither subject's teachers adequately acknowledged. Harry listened and asked questions and moved soil and thought about how a conversation about plants was somehow making him feel more settled in a castle he'd been in for less than 12 hours. At 7 he went back inside for breakfast. The Great Hall in the morning was a different animal from the feast night version, more chaotic, more honest, the performance of first impressions worn off and replaced with the reality of people eating food before they were fully awake. Harry sat with Hermione, who was already there and had already read something and was now looking at the ceiling with the expression of a person whose first night in an entirely new world had not diminished their appetite for it. "I went to the wardroom at 5:30, she said, when Harry sat down. He looked at her. "You went without me?" "I couldn't sleep. I was careful." She met his eyes, unapologetic. "I didn't take anything. I read the first 3 pages of the Gryffindor record, which was enough to determine that it's not history, it's actually functional, like a manual. Godric Gryffindor wrote instructional content." "What kind of instructional content?" "Combat theory," she said. "Specifically, spellwork that hasn't been used since the 15th century. High-level stuff. The kind of thing that isn't in any current curriculum." She sounded both thrilled and slightly alarmed, the combination of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for and wasn't sure they were ready for it. "Harry, There are spells in that book that would make the Hogwarts curriculum look like the introduction to a real course. We'll work through it properly, Harry said. Together. Obviously together. She said this with the certainty of someone for whom this was never in question. Neville should come too. Agreed. Neville arrived at the table looking like he'd slept well, which was a different quality of rested than the night before. He had Trevor in his pocket and was carrying his herbology textbook under one arm, and he sat down with the specific purposefulness of someone who has decided to be somewhere rather than ended up there. I read the treaty, he said to Harry, without preamble. Both times. And then I asked Gran, he paused, seeing Harry's expression, by Owl. She was up. She's always up at 5. He pulled a piece of toast toward him. She said she knew about it. She knew the bond existed. She didn't tell me because she thought, he stopped. His jaw worked. She thought knowing I was supposed to resonate with someone else's magic and wasn't, that it would make me feel worse about my own magic. That it would feel like one more thing I was failing at. She was trying to protect you, Harry said. Yes. Neville looked at his toast. She was wrong to, but she was trying to. He looked up. She said she's glad I know now. She said to thank you. He paused again. And she said, the Longbottom family considers the treaty still active. If you do. I do, Harry said. Something across Neville's face did something quiet and permanent. He nodded once and picked up his toast, and that was that. Ron appeared, hair doing something independent, and dropped into his seat with the momentum of someone who has never in his life moved anywhere slowly. Morning, he said, pulling 3 things toward him simultaneously. Did everyone hear about the Sorting Hat? Apparently it's been talking to portraits all morning. Moffat on the 2nd floor told the fat lady who told nearly headless Nick who told Fred who told me. He looked at Harry. Something about the most interesting sorting in 112 years. Probably exaggerating, Harry said. Nick said it used the phrase, unprecedented, Ron said. Harry thought about how many times that word had been used in the past 24 hours. It gets around, he said. Ron opened his mouth, looked at Harry's rings, counted, and closed his mouth again in the philosophical manner he had adopted regarding the rings, which was essentially, there, the number is impossible, and breakfast is more immediately actionable. The Owls came with morning mail and Harry had 3 letters. The first was from Gringotts, Sharpclaw, confirming the formal filing of all 15 Lordship declarations and noting that the first income distribution from the smallest estate had already been processed, including the educational fund Harry had requested. A dry, precise letter that managed to convey satisfaction through the specific efficiency of its language. The second was from someone he didn't expect. The handwriting on the envelope was angular and controlled, and inside was a single card that read, "The Black family acknowledges the Lordship claim. A meeting at suitable mutual convenience would be welcome. N. Black." Harry turned the card over. Nothing on the back. "Who's N. Black?" Ron said, reading upside down without apparent embarrassment. "Someone in the Black family who's apparently aware of inheritance law," Harry said. "Narcissa Malfoy is a Black," Ron said. "But she wouldn't," he frowned. "Nymphadora Tonks is a Black. She's an Auror trainee. Or, there's Sirius Black, but he's in Azkaban, so." He shrugged. Harry kept his face neutral. He stored the card and the question of N. Black alongside everything else in the mental file that was expanding faster than he'd expected and would require dedicated management. The third letter was from Dumbledore, which he saved for last because the first 2 had given him context. It was brief, written in the same warm, unhurried hand he imagined Dumbledore used for everything, and it said, "I would welcome the opportunity to speak with you at your convenience. Tea on Thursday, if you are willing. My door is always open." APWBD. Harry folded it neatly and put it in his bag. Thursday was fine. Transfiguration was first, which meant McGonagall, which meant Harry arrived 2 minutes early and sat in the front row because there was nothing to be gained from sitting at the back of a class taught by someone worth paying attention to. McGonagall arrived in cat form, which caused the predictable reaction from first-years who had not been warned. Seamus Finnegan made a sound somewhere between a greeting and alarm, and Dean Thomas, who was next to him, had the expression of someone deciding retrospectively that this was fine. McGonagall transformed and surveyed the room with the look of someone who has done this entrance for 30 years and still finds it professionally satisfying. She talked about the theory and difficulty of transfiguration with the directness of a person who believed that understating the difficulty of their subject was an insult to it. Then she set them the first practical task: turn a match into a needle. Harry looked at the match on his desk. He could feel its magical potential, a different kind of perception than physical sight, more like understanding the object's possibilities, the transfiguration theory that McGonagall had just explained making immediate structural sense in a way that connected to the grammar of magic he'd felt unsealing during the ritual. He picked up his wand. The match became a needle on his first attempt, which took about 4 seconds. He set the wand down. McGonagall appeared at his desk so quickly that she might have been walking toward it before he'd finished. She picked up the needle, examined it, it was perfect, silver and sharp and exactly right, and looked at Harry. Again, she said. She produced another match. And use less intention this time. Spread it more evenly through the object. He looked at her. The instruction was not what he'd expected, not well done, Mr. Potter, not an exclamation. An immediate redirect toward refinement. He picked up the match and felt what she meant. He had concentrated his intention at the tip and it had worked, but the distribution was uneven, the needle's end a fraction more dense with the transformation than the middle. He hadn't noticed until she said it. He focused differently, spread the intention like smoothing cloth, and transformed the match. She picked up the second needle. Examined it for longer. Better, she said. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me yet. Do it again with your non-dominant hand. He switched the wand to his left hand. Paused. Then transformed the third match she produced, which took longer and had a slight imperfection at the eye of the needle, a roughness he could feel before she pointed it out. What went wrong? She asked. The eye, he said. I rushed the detail at the end. Yes. Why? Because the broad transformation was comfortable and I got impatient with the precision part. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he was learning to read, the look of a teacher encountering a student who understands the mechanism of their own mistakes, which was rarer than the mistakes themselves. That will be your ongoing challenge, she said. You have more than enough power. The question is control, and control requires patience with the parts that don't come easily. She moved to the next student. 5 points to Gryffindor. Hermione, next to him, had transformed her match successfully on the third try, which was still well ahead of most of the class. She looked at Harry's 3 needles with the expression of someone recalibrating their benchmarks. Non-dominant hand, she said. She asked, Harry said. She didn't ask me, Hermione said, and immediately transferred her wand to her left hand. Harry watched the class around him and noticed things. Dean had artistic instinct but was overthinking the magical component, trying to visualize the end product too literally. Seamus had the power but the wrong kind of focus, too sharp, like trying to thread a needle with a fist. Ron's attempt was partially successful. The match had taken on the color and texture of metal but retained its shape, which McGonagall called a promising beginning, in a tone that suggested she meant it. Neville hadn't started. He was sitting very still with his wand in his hand, looking at the match with an expression Harry recognized from the treaty scroll, from the previous evening, the look of someone waiting for themselves to fail. Harry leaned slightly toward him. Neville. Neville looked. Feel the match first, Harry said, very quietly. Don't push. Just feel what it already wants to do. Neville frowned. What it wants to do? Everything has a magical potential. The match has one. Transfiguration isn't forcing it to change, it's finding the change it can already make and, he searched for the word, agreeing to it. Neville looked at his match. He picked it up. He held it. He transformed it. Imperfect, more needle-shaped than needle, still bearing a slight grain of the wood, but transformed, and he stared at it with the expression of someone who expected to fail and instead arrived somewhere else. "How did you?" he said. "You knew what to do," Harry said. "You just stopped waiting for yourself to get it wrong." McGonagall had been at the back of the room. She arrived at Neville's desk and looked at his needle with the expression she kept for genuine progress. 5 points to Gryffindor, Mr. Longbottom. Neville looked as if someone had told him he could fly. Charms was after lunch, Professor Flitwick, a small, precise man with the energy of someone who had been genuinely delighted by his subject for 60 years and saw no reason to moderate that delight. He called the register, reached Harry's name, said, "Ah yes, Harry Potter," and fell off his pile of books, which Harry gathered was a recurring event. They learned the basics of wand movement and incantation theory, which Harry absorbed in the way he absorbed everything now, not as new information but as vocabulary for things he already understood structurally. The language of spells, the intention behind movement, the relationship between sound and magical direction. At the end of class, Flitwick kept him back. The other students filtered out, Hermione casting Harry a look that promised she'd wait, and then it was Harry and the small charms professor in the suddenly quiet classroom. Flitwick looked at Harry's rings with the expression of a scholar encountering primary source material. "May I?" he said, indicating the rings with a small gesture. Harry held out his hand. Flitwick examined them with eyes that were not merely impressed but technically engaged. "Peveril," he murmured. "The blue-silver one. And that, good lord, that's the Ravenclaw ring." He looked up. "I took a minor in magical lineage studies at university. The Ravenclaw lordship has been dormant for 300 years. It was in my mother's line," Harry said. Distantly. Flitwick released his hand and stepped back, pulling himself together with the practiced ease of someone who has encountered surprising things before and has a procedure for it. "I wanted to speak to you privately because I wanted to offer you something that may be unusual," he said. "I teach charms. Your magical core, based on what I can perceive from the ritual signatures, contains a significant amount of charms-adjacent inheritance. You will find the standard first-year curriculum deeply insufficient for what you're capable of." He paused. "I run an independent study group. 2 evenings a week. Upper-year students who want to work beyond the curriculum. I would like to invite you." Harry considered him. "Who else is in it?" "Currently? 3 6th years and a 7th year. You would be significantly younger than all of them." He said this without any suggestion that he thought it was a problem. It would also, he hesitated, very briefly, the hesitation of a man choosing honesty over tact, it would require that you keep up with the standard curriculum simultaneously, which given your year placement may feel somewhat slow. "I'll manage," Harry said. Flitwick smiled. "Good. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Classroom 213. He turned back to his desk. "Oh, and Mr. Potter? The Ravenclaw line carries a specific affinity for charm harmonics. The way 2 spells interact when cast in sequence. When you're ready to explore it, come find me." Harry went out to find Hermione waiting in the corridor with her arms folded and her expression set to, "I have approximately 7 questions." "Well," she said. "Independent study group. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. With the upper years?" "Apparently." She considered this for exactly as long as it took to decide it was acceptable. "I'm going to ask if I can come." He'd probably say yes. Obviously he'd say yes. She fell into step beside him. "Defense against the dark arts is last. With Quirrell." "Yes," Harry said. How are you planning to handle it?" Harry thought about how to answer that. The Horcrux situation was a thing he understood deeply and intended to address deliberately, on his own terms, and Quirrell specifically was a problem with two layers: Quirrell the person, who was a compromised host, and Voldemort the fragment, who was using him as a vehicle and did not know that the 11-year-old who had survived his killing curse 11 years ago was now carrying 15 Lordship inheritances and 63 unsealed blocks of ancestral magic. Normally, Harry said. For now. Defense against the dark arts was in a classroom that smelled strongly of garlic and had a specific quality of wrongness that Harry perceived the moment he crossed the threshold. Not overwhelming, subtle, the way you notice a smell that shouldn't be in a particular room, your brain flagging it as incongruous before you consciously process it. The Horcrux signature, reaching across the room in the particular way that Voldemort's magic reached, looking for something. It found Harry and went quiet. The way a predator goes still when it realizes it might be observed. Harry sat down and opened his notebook. Quirrell came in with the stammer and the nervousness and the turban, and Harry watched him with the attention of someone who has turned the sensitivity up on their perception far enough to see the structure beneath the surface. Quirrell's magical signature was split, his own, thin and anxious and pale, and over it, through it, the dark and cold signature of something else entirely. The two didn't blend. They existed in the same space without merging, like oil and water that have been forced into a bottle. The wrongness of that cohabitation was profound, and Harry felt it in the same way he felt the Horcrux in his own scar, as an intrusion, something that had no right to the space it occupied. The class was structured: the theory of dark creatures, jinxes versus hexes versus curses, the history of dark magic as a legal category. Quirrell taught it with the stammering diffidence of a man who was performing anxiety, and Harry noted the performance, noted the gaps in it, the moments when Quirrell forgot to stammer because he was thinking about something else. He noted the way Quirrell's eyes moved across the class and paused, for a fraction longer than they should, on Harry. Then moved on. Harry raised his hand. "PP Professor," he said, mimicking Quirrell's stutter without mockery, just a kind of conversational mirroring. "Can you explain the difference between a Horcrux and a parasitic dark binding?" The room went very quiet. Hermione looked at him sharply. Several students shifted in their seats, the way people shift when something happens that they don't understand but can feel the temperature of. Quirrell stopped. The stammer was entirely absent when he said, very carefully, "That's a rather advanced topic for first-year defense." "We're talking about dark magic as a legal category," Harry said pleasantly. "I thought the distinction was relevant to how the Ministry classifies extreme cases." Quirrell's hands, which had been resting on his desk, went very still. The dark signature in the room changed, not grew, exactly, but shifted, became more attentive, oriented itself toward Harry with a precision that had nothing of Quirrell's diffidence in it. Harry looked directly at Quirrell and smiled. Not a challenging smile. Not a provocative one. The smile of someone who knows exactly where they are and is entirely comfortable in their knowledge. Quirrell looked away first. Perhaps we might cover that in a later lesson," he said. The stammer was back. "For now, let us continue with," Harry opened his notebook and wrote, "Parasitic dark binding, soul fragment anchored in living host without consent. Voldemort confirms awareness with stillness response." He underlined confirms awareness. After class, in the corridor, Hermione appeared at his elbow. "That was deliberate," she said, in a tone that was simultaneously impressed and slightly reproving. "I wanted to know if the fragment could hear me," Harry said. "Or if it was passive." "And? It can hear me. It knows I know." He considered this. "Which actually changes the timeline. I thought I had more time to research before this became urgent. Now it's more urgent." "Urgent how?" "If Voldemort knows I know about him, he'll accelerate whatever he's planning with the stone. Which means we need to understand the stone's protection situation faster than I'd intended." He pulled his bag higher on his shoulder. "We need access to the restricted section." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Flitwick will write us a note, she said. If you ask him. I'll ask him at Thursday's study session. Until then, Harry paused, because the castle had just done something. A slight shift in the ambient magic, like a room tilting by a fraction of a degree, enough to notice if you were paying attention. He looked up. They were in the corridor near the second-floor staircase, and the portrait of Cadmus Moffat was 3 frames down, watching him. Moffat, Harry said. The painted architect straightened. The room, he said, without preamble. The 3rd door in the west corridor. There's a second section. Behind the main shelves. You'll need all 15 rings in contact simultaneously. He paused. I would have mentioned it earlier, but I was not entirely certain you were ready to know. I am now. What's in the second section? Harry said. The castle's memory, Moffat said. Everything the founders put in those walls and intended only a convergent lord to access. He looked at the rings. The ward maps, for one thing. Every ward in this building, its function, its vulnerabilities, its maintenance requirements. He paused, meaningfully. Including the 3rd floor. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked at him. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he agreed. The ward room at midnight was different from the ward room at 11 o'clock the previous evening. The torches in the corridor had gone low and the stone held the cold of the September night, and the door opened for Harry without hesitation, as it had before, and inside the amber light was warmer and more settled, as if the room had been awake all day waiting for this. Neville was with them. Harry had asked him at dinner and Neville had said yes with the quiet decisiveness he'd been building since yesterday evening, putting each small decision down like a plank on a bridge he was building as he crossed it. The main shelves were as they'd been, the 7 family record books, the rolled documents, the objects Harry hadn't yet examined. Harry moved past all of it to the back wall, which appeared to be solid stone, the same dark charcoal as the rest of the chamber. He looked at his hands. The 15 rings. He pressed both palms flat against the wall, all 15 rings in contact with the stone simultaneously. The response was not subtle. The wall didn't open so much as it receded, pulled back into the sides in a movement that was not mechanical but organic, like a pair of hands unfolding, and beyond it was a space that should not have fitted inside the castle's architecture but did, because architecture at Hogwarts was more suggestion than constraint. Larger than the main chamber. Completely dark until Harry stepped through, at which point every amber lamp ignited at once with a warmth that felt like welcome. Shelves, maps, instruments. Rolled ward schematics on one wall, floor to ceiling, each labeled in the handwriting of 4 different people, the founders, as distinct from each other as their personalities. A table at the center with a stone basin, similar to the Gringotts ritual pool but smaller, clearly designed for a different purpose. And on a central plinth, under glass, something that looked like a compass but pointed in 6 directions simultaneously and was currently pointing one of them with great urgency at a spot Harry calculated was directly above them and slightly east. The 3rd floor. The ward schematics, Hermione said, already moving toward the rolled maps with the focused energy of someone who has found the thing they needed and intends to use it. She unrolled one carefully and her expression changed immediately. Harry. These are active. What do you mean active? These are live ward maps. They update in real time. She pointed. The lines of the schematic were not static, they moved slightly, the way the runes in the Gringotts ritual chamber had moved, the rhythm of working magic. We can see the entire ward structure of the castle. She traced a finger along a corridor on the map. Here's the 3rd floor. The protection's on, there must be something specific, the wards here are, she looked up, eyes wide. Harry, the protections on whatever's in that corridor are significant but not impenetrable. There are 7 layers. Some of them are Dumbledore's. Some of them are older. Can you read the ward types? Harry said, crossing to her. Some of them. She pointed. Cerberus binding, that's the creature, there's a door with a living creature behind it. Next is, I don't know this one. The notation is old. Third is a chess variant, probably animated pieces, that's a transfiguration-based trap. Fourth is, she faltered. Let me look, Harry said, standing beside her. The fourth notation was in Slytherin's handwriting, and Harry could read it with the specific clarity that came with the Slytherin Lordship, not just the words but the intent behind them. A challenge that responded to Parseltongue. A living plant that would have a weakness to fire. A logic puzzle. And finally, at the seventh layer, the Mirror of Ariste, which Harry had no record of in his inheritance but whose function the ward schematic described with a precision that made his chest tight. The stone is behind the mirror, Harry said. How do you know? Neville said, from behind them. The last ward reflects your deepest desire. Someone who wants to use the stone will see themselves using it. Someone who wants to find it and keep it safe will see themselves finding it. He looked at the map. It's built to only give the stone to someone who doesn't want it for themselves. That's elegant, Hermione said. Dumbledore built that layer, Harry said. The last one. He stood back and looked at the full map. 7 layers. A living creature, a plant, a game, a Parseltongue challenge, a logic puzzle, an alignment test, and a mirror. He could navigate all of it, he knew he could, with the same bone certainty he knew most things now. But the question was whether he should, and when, and whether the threat was urgent enough to justify moving before he was ready to handle what came after. Voldemort knew Harry knew. That changed the clock. The stone is safe tonight, Harry said. Probably safe for the next several weeks. Quirrell can't move before he understands more about me, and understanding more about me is going to require time he doesn't have easily. He straightened. But I want us to know every layer of this before we go near it. No improvising. Hermione looked at him. You're going to go there anyway, aren't you? At some point. Yes, Harry said. Not because he felt bound to the heroism of it, nothing as simple as that. Because Voldemort had killed his parents and was wearing a borrowed body 2 corridors from where he slept, and the idea of waiting for someone else to handle it was so foreign to his nature that it wasn't really an option he was considering. Then we prepare, Hermione said, with the practicality of someone who has assessed the situation and elected to be useful rather than alarmed. Properly. Yes, Harry said. And we tell no one, Neville said, quietly. Both Harry and Hermione looked at him. He was looking at the ward map, and his jaw was set in the way it had been setting all day, incrementally more certain, each hour adding a layer to the foundation. Not yet. Not until we know more. Harry looked at him. Agreed. The 3 of them stood in the Founder's secret room, under the light of a 1,000-year-old castle that had been waiting for them with the patience of something that understood that the important things always arrived eventually, and looked at the map of the thing they were going to have to walk into, and thought about what it meant to be 11 years old and already know the shape of your own story. Outside, the grounds were quiet and silver. Somewhere in the forest something large moved through the trees. In the dungeons, Quirrell sat awake in the dark, which Harry somehow knew the way he knew the temperature of the stones, the castle telling him, in its low continuous register, where the wrongness was. He reached out with the same instinct and touched the castle's awareness gently. The torches on the 3rd floor, he felt, were burning a little brighter tonight. Good. Chapter 5, The Stone and the Scar. 3 weeks passed. They were not quiet weeks, but they were deliberate ones. Harry moved through them the way he moved through most things now, with attention, with patience for the parts that required patience, and without the performance of being less than he was. Flitwick's independent study group met twice a week and the upper-year students had gone through a predictable sequence of reactions to Harry's presence: surprise, skepticism, recalibration, and finally a grudging respect that by the 3rd session had stopped being grudging. A 7th year named Marcus Webb, who was the best natural charms practitioner Harry had met apart from Flitwick himself, spent 40 minutes one Tuesday trying to outcast Harry in a harmony exercise and came away from it flushed and grinning with the specific glee of someone who had found a worthy sparring partner. The wardroom became a regular destination. Hermione had catalogued all 7 family record books within the first 10 days, producing notes that were dense enough to constitute secondary texts in their own right. Neville had taken to the herbology records with the same hunger he'd brought to the Longbottom Treaty Scroll, finding their specific magical plant theory that predated the current curriculum by 5 centuries and that answered questions he'd been carrying about why certain plants responded to him with a familiarity that his textbooks couldn't explain. His hands stopped apologizing when they touched things. He repotted a mandrake in herbology one morning with a confidence that made Sprout pause mid-sentence and watch. Harry worked through the Gryffindor combat records and the Peveril texts and the Slytherin theoretical writings with the same systematic attention he'd given the ward maps. The Slytherin material was the most surprising, not dark, not the architecture of cruelty that the house's reputation implied, but strategic theory of enormous sophistication, the logic of magical systems laid bare with a clarity that was almost mathematical. He understood, reading it, what Slytherin had actually been building and how completely his intentions had been misread by everyone who came after. He also spent time, each evening, sitting with the Horcrux. Not literally, sitting with his eyes closed, his back to the wardroom's stone wall, feeling the thing inside his scar with the steady attention of a doctor examining a wound. Getting to know its edges. Its temperature. The specific quality of its otherness. He'd told Hermione about it on the 2nd day. He'd told Neville on the 4th. Both of them had responded in ways that surprised him. Hermione had immediately begun researching soul magic with the focus of someone who has identified a problem and intends to solve it through sheer accumulation of knowledge, and Neville had said, quietly, "What do you need?" which was different and possibly more useful. What Harry needed was time to understand the Horcrux's relationship to his own magic before he moved against it. Because the thing he'd realized in his 3rd evening of attention was this: the fragment was leaking. Voldemort's soul piece, trapped in Harry's scar for 10 years, had not merely sat dormant, it had been slowly losing coherence, like dye in water, bleeding its edges into Harry's own magical core. Most of what it had bled was dark and should not have been there. But some of it, a small fraction, the parts of Voldemort that had existed before he'd unmade himself through Horcruxes, was knowledge. Raw, specific, and retrievable if Harry could isolate it from the intent. He could read the magical component of written languages he'd never studied. He could feel the specific architectural flaws in the castle's earliest wards, which Slytherin had known about and never told the others. He could, when he chose, understand the intent behind magic being cast in his vicinity, not the spell, but the purpose beneath it. He did not consider this a gift. He considered it information, and information was useful. The morning that everything shifted was a Wednesday in late October, grey and cold, with the smell of the first real Scottish winter coming down off the mountains. Harry woke at 5 as usual, lay still for his morning inventory, and knew immediately that something had changed. The Horcrux was louder. Not loud in any external sense, no one else in the dormitory could hear it. But the frequency of it, which had been the low and almost inert signal of something dormant and degrading, had shifted upward into something more deliberate. More directed. The fragment was not degrading this morning. It was listening. Harry got up, dressed, and went to the wardroom alone. He sat at the table in the inner chamber with both hands flat on the stone surface and reached inward with the careful attention he'd been practicing for 3 weeks. The Horcrux was active because Voldemort was active, doing something, pushing something, and the fragment was responding like a compass needle responding to a magnet. Pointing. Oriented. Toward the 3rd floor. Harry sat with that for 60 seconds. Then he went to find Hermione. She was already up, she was always already up, in the common room with a book that wasn't a textbook, something on advanced soul theory that she'd old to flourish and blots for under a name she described as precautionary. "He's moving," Harry said. She closed the book. "No other questions." "Not tonight," Harry said, sitting across from her. Tonight we plan. Tell me everything you've got on the protection layers. They sat by the fire and went through it point by point, speaking quietly in the empty common room as the October dawn came gray and cold through the windows. Hermione had developed the ward map analysis into a working document that covered every layer, including the gap in the third layer that she'd identified a week ago. The animated chess set had a weakness in its endgame logic, a pattern that could be forced through a specific series of moves that the enchantment hadn't been designed to anticipate, because the enchanter had assumed a standard skill level. Who set the chess enchantment? Harry asked. I don't know. It's not in any of the record books. It's a transfiguration base with a game theory overlay, Harry said. Which is an interesting combination. Someone who understood both. He thought about it. McGonagall. Hermione looked at him. She didn't set it as a trap for students. She set it as a challenge she didn't think anyone would reach in the first place. He pulled the map toward him, reading the ward notation. The weakness in the endgame, she knows about it. It's not an oversight, it's a signature. She always leaves a solvable line in her transfiguration problems. It's how she teaches. How do you know that? I've been in her class for 3 weeks. He looked up. She'd rather have a student who understands the system than one who memorizes the answer. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Neville joined them at 7, ate breakfast while they talked, and when they were done he said, Tonight. Tonight, Harry agreed. I'm going with you, Neville said. Harry looked at him. You don't have to. I know, Neville said. It was 2 words with the weight of a longer sentence behind them. The bridge he'd been building one plank at a time had gotten him somewhere solid, and he intended to stand on it. Hermione said, Obviously I'm going. Harry looked at both of them for a moment. All right, he said. Tonight. The castle at midnight on a late October Wednesday had a quality of held breath, as if the stones themselves knew something was going to happen and were being polite about it. Harry led them through corridors he now knew the way he knew the ward room, not by memorized route but by the castle's continuous low direction, the ambient intelligence that had adopted him as someone whose whereabouts mattered. The third-floor corridor was empty. The warning Dumbledore had given at the start of term feast sat in the air like old smoke, a painful death awaits. Harry walked past it without particular concern. Behind the locked door at the end, he could feel the first protection, not through the door, through the castle, a reading of what was there the way you read the weight of something before you pick it up. He opened the door with a touch that was barely a touch, the lock turning with no wand and no word, just the application of the same instinct that opened the ward room. The room was large and dark and smelled of something animal and warm. Harry raised his wand and produced a light, not Lumos, something older from the Gryffindor texts that produced a steadier, more directional illumination, and moved it until it found what it was looking for. 3 heads. 1 dog. Fluffy was enormous in the particular way of magical creatures, sized past the point where size is a threat because the threat is now simply a fact of its existence. 3 heads, each one independently asleep, each one dreaming something that made its paws twitch. The harp in the corner was still playing, faintly, the enchantment sustaining itself on its last reserves. Harry looked at the trapdoor beneath the dog's paw. He looked at the harp. He looked at the sleeping creature with the attention he'd been giving everything for 3 weeks, feeling its magical signature, not dark, not threatening in its own right, simply a creature that had been placed here and was doing its job with considerable commitment. He felt something like respect for that. He reinforced the harp's enchantment with a touch, not theatrical, just practical, the way you make sure a door is properly closed before you walk away from it, and the music deepened slightly. Fluffy's breathing deepened with it. Through the trapdoor, Harry said. You just cast something on the harp, Neville whispered. Topped it up. It was running low. Harry moved toward the trapdoor. Stay close. The devil's snare was instant and enthusiastic, the vines finding them the moment they dropped through, and Harry said sharply, Lumos Maxima, directed downward, both of you, now," and the light hit the plant at the same moment he felt its nature through his herbology inheritance, not malice, just response, the plant doing what it had been designed to do, and spoke to it in a register that wasn't quite Parseltongue but was something adjacent, something that existed in the Founder's magical vocabulary, and that the plant, which had been grown in this castle and was saturated with Founder's magic, responded to by withdrawing entirely. Hermione landed on her feet and looked at the retreating vines. "Did you just talk to it?" "More or less." The winged keys were a problem of a different kind, 100 of them, silver and beating, filling the domed space with frantic movement, and the brooms at the edge of the room were old and looked it. Harry picked one, got on it without ceremony, and went up. Flying, it turned out, was the one thing he understood, not through his inheritance but through his body. It was physical, immediate, the broom responding to intention the way his magic responded to intention, through contact and will. He went straight up to the level of the key mass and stopped, hovering, reading the movement patterns with his eyes. Every key moved in a pattern. They looked chaotic but they weren't, they were orbiting, the way molecules orbit, each one on a trajectory that repeated. The right key would be the one with a slightly different pattern, the outlier. He watched for 6 seconds, found it, a large silver key with a slightly bent wing that made its orbit irregular, and took it in a movement that was less chase and more interception, angling his broom to the point where the key's next orbit would bring it. He plucked it from the air. He was back on the ground in under 45 seconds total. Neville was looking at him with an expression that had long since stopped trying to be surprised. Hermione said, "We need to talk about you taking the Quidditch trials." "Later," Harry said. The chess set was worse than the map had suggested, only because being in the room made it more real. The pieces were as tall as they were, carved from black and white stone, and they moved when the three of them stepped onto the board with the purposeful menace of things that have been waiting to be used. Harry studied the board configuration for 30 seconds, found McGonagall's solvable line, and played the endgame out in his head in another 20. "I'm going to move us through," Harry said. "Don't touch any piece unless I tell you. And when I say move, move exactly where I say." 7 moves. It took 4 minutes. The White King, when it fell, did so with a sound like a cannon, and the entire board froze, every piece going still simultaneously. Harry walked through the gap in the frozen pieces and the door beyond opened. The troll was already unconscious, which was the first indication that someone had been through here recently. Not peacefully unconscious, it had been hit hard, a blunt magic impact, the kind that left a specific kind of signature. Harry felt the signature and identified it and felt something cold settle in his chest. "Someone's already in there," Neville said. "Quirrell," Harry said. "He's ahead of us." The next room smelled of smoke, a black fire across the door behind them and a purple fire across the door ahead, both burning without fuel, both radiating the chill of something sustained by pure magical intention. On the floor, a row of bottles and a roll of parchment. Hermione went to it immediately. The logic puzzle took her 60 seconds. She did it the way she did everything, with the complete focus of someone who has no cognitive space for panic because the interesting problem is consuming it all. She pointed to 2 bottles. "That one forward. That one back." "You're certain?" Harry said. "It's logically determinate," she said. "There's only one solution that satisfies all the conditions." "Yes, I'm certain." Harry picked up the forward bottle. "Stay here. Both of you." "Harry," Neville started. "I know what's in there," Harry said. He looked at both of them. Not a goodbye, nothing so dramatic. Just clear acknowledgement of the fact that what was ahead was his specifically, in a way that the traps before hadn't been. "Keep the way back open. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, go to McGonagall. Don't go to Dumbledore first." Hermione looked like she wanted to argue. She looked at his face and didn't. 20 minutes, she said. Harry drank the potion and walked through the purple fire. The last chamber was quieter than the others. Not the quiet of emptiness but the quiet of presence, the quality of a room where something significant was happening or had just happened. It was large, circular, the walls stone, and at its center stood the mirror of Ariste, exactly as the ward schematic had shown, taller than Harry and framed in gold that had gone dark with age. Quirrell stood in front of it. He was not stammering. He had his back to the mirror and his back to the door, which meant he heard Harry enter but did not immediately react, and in that non-reaction was a kind of performance, the calculated stillness of something that has decided not to be startled. When he turned, the turban was still on his head and his face wore none of the nervous diffidence of the classroom. It wore nothing. The blankness of a face that has been evacuated. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said, and his voice was only faintly Quirrell's. There was something else in the resonance of it, something that used Quirrell's vocal cords the way a puppeteer uses a hand. "I wondered when you would come. I wondered when you would move," Harry said. He came into the room at a normal pace, not hurrying, not stopping. He let his gaze move to the mirror and back. "Did you get the stone?" Something in Quirrell's face shifted. "The mirror doesn't show me how to get it. I can see it, but I cannot," and here the voice shifted, the puppeteer more present than the puppet, "cannot reach it." "Because you want to use it," Harry said. "I want to use it," Quirrell agreed, in the voice that was not quite his. "To restore what was taken from me. To rebuild what should never have been diminished." A pause. "You understand something about that? Having things taken. Having what you are compressed and hidden and suppressed." "Don't," Harry said. "Don't what?" "Compare yourself to me. It doesn't work and it's uninteresting." He stopped about 10 feet from the mirror. He could see his own reflection in it, not what it was supposed to show, not the image of his deepest desire, because his deepest desire right now was exactly what he was doing, being here and addressing this, and the mirror was showing him doing exactly that, which was simultaneously on the nose and clarifying. "I know what you are. What's left of you." Quirrell tilted his head. Then he turned to the mirror, and his face was in profile, and Harry could see the moment when the possessing intelligence focused. "What are you?" the voice said, and it was entirely Voldemort now, nothing of Quirrell left in it. "You are 11 years old. You fainted on a train platform a month ago." "I did," Harry said. "And then I went to Gringotts." A silence. "You carry my mark," Voldemort said. "I carry a piece of you," Harry said. "There's a difference. And I've been getting to know it for 3 weeks, which means I know you better than you know yourself at this point, which is probably uncomfortable for someone who spent 40 years deciding they were the most important intelligence in any room." Something moved across Quirrell's face, the puppet reacting to the puppeteer's emotion, the rage of something very powerful being addressed as a problem to be managed rather than a force to be feared. "You are a child," Voldemort said. "I'm the convergent lord of 15 bloodlines including Slytherins," Harry said. "Which makes me your heir in a more real sense than you were ever his, technically speaking. You might want to think about what that means for the power dynamics here." The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Harry felt it through the castle's awareness, the ambient magic in the chamber pulling toward Quirrell/Voldemort as the dark presence began drawing on it, preparing. He felt the intent before the action, the way he'd felt Quirrell's attention in the classroom but magnified enormously, power that was vast and cold and deeply wrong, the signature of someone who had remade themselves through violence into something that was no longer entirely human. Harry stood in the center of it and let it wash over him. Not because it wasn't affecting him. It was, he could feel the pressure of it, the weight of Voldemort's magical presence pushing against his own the way weather pushes against a window. But the window was made of 15 lordship inheritances and 63 unsealed blocks of ancestral magic and the castle's own recognition, and it held. "Step aside," Voldemort said. "You cannot stop me." "I don't need to stop you," Harry said. "You can't get the stone. The mirror won't give it to you while you want to use it. So you're stuck." He paused. "Unless you make me a different problem." Quirrell raised his wand. The spell was fast and dark, and Harry felt it coming through the horcrux in his scar, the fragment resonating with the full soul the way a tuning fork resonates with its frequency, giving Harry approximately a quarter second of warning before the magic arrived. He sidestepped and redirected simultaneously, not a blocking something that dark was its own risk, but a redirection, channeling the spell's momentum sideways into the stone wall, where it carved a black groove and died. "You redirected that," Voldemort said, and now there was something in the voice that was not quite anger and not quite interest but sat precisely between them. "Without a counter-curse. Direction is architecture," Harry said. "Once you see the structure of something, you can work with the structure." He raised his own wand. "Not dramatically, the way you pick up a tool you know how to use. I'm not here to duel you. I'm here because the fragment you left in my head has been telling me things about you for 3 weeks, and I wanted to meet the source material." "What things?" "That you were brilliant, once," Harry said. "Before you started removing pieces of yourself." Tom Riddle had a genuinely extraordinary mind. The diary, the ring, the locket, each one took something. "What's left of you is powerful, but it's not what it was. You're not what you were." Quirrell's body went completely rigid. "Do not say that name. You don't get to decide what I say," Harry said simply. "Not in this castle." The dark magic came in a different form this time, not a directed spell but an ambient push, a wave of force that was intended to throw Harry off his feet and disorient him, the kind of attack that worked on people whose relationship to their own magical grounding was uncertain. Harry's relationship to his magical grounding was approximately the opposite of uncertain. He felt the wave arrive, felt its shape, and did something that would have been impossible before the ritual and was now, if he was honest, not even particularly difficult. He absorbed it. Not all of it, he wasn't reckless, but enough, redirecting the rest into the floor where it dispersed through the stone and into the castle's warding system, which swallowed it with the capacity of something that had been eating ambient dark magic for 1,000 years and had opinions about it. Quirrell staggered. The feedback of having a significant magical push absorbed and redirected was significant. Harry walked forward. "Here's what's going to happen," Harry said, covering the distance between them at a measured pace. "You cannot get the stone through this mirror. You cannot defeat me in this room. You are in a borrowed body that is deteriorating, I can feel it, the resonance between your fragment and mine, I can feel the state Quirrell is in, and it is not sustainable." He stopped 6 feet from Quirrell. "And I'm carrying a piece of you inside me, which means whatever you do to me, you do to a part of yourself." Quirrell's face twisted. "Then I will take the fragment back." "You can't," Harry said. "It's mine now. It's been degrading into my core for 10 years. The boundaries between it and me are complicated." He paused. "But I can remove it." Silence. "I've been studying it for 3 weeks," Harry said. "The fragment. The way it interfaces with my own magic. I know how to separate it. And when I do, it will lose the protection of being inside a living host. It will be loose, degraded, and," he looked at Quirrell, "homeless." "You would destroy yourself in the attempt," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said. "I wouldn't. But I'm happy to let you think that if it's useful." He held Quirrell's gaze. "What I actually came here for is not the stone. The stone will keep. Dumbledore will realize you've made your move and he'll be here within the hour, and whatever you had planned for tonight is already over." He took 1 step forward. "I came here for the fragment. Because I'm not walking through my first year of school with a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head. That's not something I'm willing to do." Quirrell raised the wand again, and this time the intent was different, not an attack on Harry but an attempt at something else, something Harry felt as a reaching, a pulling inward, the fragment in his scar responding with a sudden pulling sensation of its own, the full soul reaching for it. Harry let it get close. Let the reaching come. Let Voldemort feel the fragment, feel its shape, feel the 10 years of degradation and the months of Harry's attention, the full picture of what it had become, what it had bled into, what it was not anymore, and most specifically the fact that it was surrounded, on every side, by 15 Lordship inheritances that had recognized the intrusion and formed around it the way the body forms scar tissue. Voldemort couldn't take it. It wasn't separable from that direction. Harry was the only direction from which it was separable. He reached inward, to the place he'd been visiting every evening for 3 weeks, where the fragment sat like a splinter at the edge of his own magical core. He felt its edges, the thin, cold boundary between Voldemort and himself. He felt the way it had eroded from both sides, what was his that had seeped in, what was Voldemort's that had seeped out. He felt the 15 inheritances around it, patient and solid. He did not remove it. Not tonight. Tonight was about something else. What he did was seal it. Not destroy, he didn't have the specific knowledge for destruction yet, Hermione was still researching that and he trusted her timeline. But seal, the magical equivalent of encapsulating a wound to stop the bleeding, wrapping the fragment in a containment structure that used the same principles as the ward room's wards and the Gringotts ritual chamber's protections and the Founder's own defensive theory, all of it synthesized into something specific and original and precisely fitted to the shape of the thing he was containing. The fragment went quiet. Not gone. But contained. Isolated. No longer leaking in either direction. Harry felt the connection to Quirrell sever, not the fragment disappearing, but its ability to communicate with the full soul snapping cleanly, because a contained fragment couldn't resonate outward. He felt Voldemort's shock in the fraction of a second before the connection closed entirely. Quirrell collapsed. Not a dramatic fall, a slow subsidence, like a building losing its structural support, the legs going first and the rest following without particular urgency. He hit the floor and lay still, and Harry could hear his breathing, shallow and labored, the sound of a body that had been used as a vehicle for too long and had come to the end of what it could sustain. Harry was at his side immediately. He put 2 fingers to Quirrell's throat. The pulse was there, weak and irregular. "He needs a healer," Harry said, to the room, which was how he talked to the castle now. "Medical help. Not just Pomfrey. A proper healer." He felt the castle's response, a quickening in the ward pulse, a ripple outward through the stone, the message passing through the magical infrastructure the way messages moved in this building, faster than running. Harry sat back on his heels and looked at Quirrell's face. Without Voldemort's animating presence, it was just a face, a young man's face, not much older than mid-20s, wearing the deep exhaustion of someone who had been carrying something that was too heavy and too wrong for too long. "You were a good teacher at one point," Harry said, to the unconscious man. He meant it. He'd read Quirrell's academic history in a Hogwarts record the castle had shown him, a brilliant defense scholar, a talented duelist, a man who had gone looking for things that were larger than him and found something that ate him alive. "I'm sorry it went this way." He stood up. The mirror of Ariste was behind him, and he looked at it now, properly, for the first time since entering the room. His reflection looked back. It was still showing him exactly what he was, standing in this room, having done what he'd done, present and intact. He reached into the mirror with an outstretched hand and felt the stone drop into his palm. It was warm. Smaller than he expected. Red and smooth and dense with the kind of magic that had sustained itself for 600 years through the effort of a genuinely extraordinary man. He held it in his open hand and looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in his pocket. The door behind him burst open. Not Hermione, not quite 20 minutes yet. Dumbledore came through the purple fire with the specific urgency of someone who has been moving very fast from very far away, his robes still settling around him, his wand out. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the room, at Quirrell on the floor, at Harry standing in front of the mirror, at the absence of catastrophe. He looked at Harry for a long time. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore crossed to Quirrell and crouched, moving with the assessing speed of a man who knew medical magic and was applying it without fanfare. His expression as he worked was complicated and private. "He's alive," Harry said. He needs a healer. I told the castle. Yes, Dumbledore said. Healers from St. Mungo's are coming. He stood. He looked at Harry, and what was in his face was not the strategic assessment that Harry had learned to look for in their interactions. It was something more genuine. You sealed the fragment. Yes. Without destroying it. I'm not ready to destroy it yet. Hermione is working on the theory. We'll have it properly in the next few weeks. Harry said it in the tone of a project update, which he was aware might be slightly incongruous. I've got the stone. Dumbledore's gaze dropped to Harry's pocket. Harry produced the Philosopher's Stone and held it out. Dumbledore looked at it in Harry's open hand. He looked at Harry. You just held it. The mirror only gives it to someone who wants to find it but not use it, Harry said. That's still true. I found it and I don't intend to use it. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Give it back to Flammel. He's old enough to deserve to make his own decisions about it, and this castle is the wrong place for something this powerful. Dumbledore took the stone. He held it in his hands with a specific weight that Harry recognized as grief, not for the stone, but for something adjacent to it, something it represented. Nicholas and I have discussed it, Dumbledore said quietly. He has accepted what must come. He's accepted dying, Harry said. Not harshly. Just clearly. That was his decision to make. Yes. Dumbledore looked at Harry. It was. A pause. How long have you known about Quirrell? Since the sorting feast, Harry said. I noticed the Horcrux signature in the first 30 seconds of being in the same room. And you waited 3 weeks. I spent 3 weeks preparing, Harry said. There's a difference. He kept his voice even. This was the conversation he'd been working toward since that first morning in Gringotts, since Dumbledore had walked through the metal door and looked at 15 rings with an expression that was control over something much more complex. While I was preparing, I also finished the first 5 Gryffindor record books, completed an outline of all 15 Lordship inheritances, identified the 2 structural weaknesses in the castle's eastern wards, helped Neville Longbottom understand why his magic has been misfiring for his entire life, and started an independent study program with Professor Flitwick. He paused. I haven't been wasting time. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. No, he said. You have not. I need you to be honest with me, Harry said. Going forward. Not everything, I understand there are things you're managing that I'm not ready for and that's fine, I'll tell you when I think that's changed. But the things that directly affect me, the Horcrux situation, what you know about the other fragments, what the prophecy actually says. Those things. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not asking you to make me your general. I'm asking you to stop making me your pawn. The word sat in the chamber. Dumbledore did not flinch from it. That, Dumbledore said, slowly, is a fair request. It's not a request, Harry said, gently. It's how things are going to be. Dumbledore looked at him. The portrait in Harry's head of this man was complex now, not simple respect, not simple suspicion, but the clear-eyed recognition of someone brilliant and flawed who had built a system around a version of Harry that had never existed, and who was now, in real time, in a chamber beneath his own school, encountering the actual version for the first time. You are very different from what I expected, Dumbledore said, for the second time. You said that at Gringotts, Harry said. It remains true. The headmaster looked at Quirrell. I am sorry, he said, and it was not clear whether he meant to Harry or to the unconscious man on the floor. Perhaps both. I know, Harry said. He went to the door, then paused. The fragment in my scar, he said, without turning. When I destroy it, and I will, I'll need you there. Not because I can't do it alone. Because you'll want to witness it, and I think you deserve to. He heard Dumbledore exhale. Thank you, the headmaster said. Harry walked back through the purple fire and out into the room with the bottles, where Hermione and Neville were waiting with the specific tension of people who have been watching a door for 19 minutes and 45 seconds. Hermione looked at his face. Neville looked at his hands. "Done?" Hermione said. "Done enough," Harry said. "The stone is with Dumbledore. Quirrell is alive. Voldemort is contained." He looked at both of them. "We should go back to bed." They stood there for a moment, the three of them, in a room deep beneath a castle that was very old and had opinions, at midnight, at the end of something that wasn't quite over but had decisively turned. "Are you all right?" Neville asked. Harry thought about it honestly. His scar was quiet, quieter than it had been since before he could remember, the fragment sealed and still, no longer bleeding its cold edges into his own magic. His magical core was steady and full and genuinely his own in a way it had never been before tonight. The stone was safe. Quirrell was breathing. "Yeah," he said. "I think I actually am." They walked out through the frozen chess pieces and the retreating devil's snare and up through the trapdoor, Fluffy sleeping deeply above them, and into the castle's midnight corridors where the torches burned low and the portraits dozed, and the castle walked them home in its own way, the right doors open, the right turns lit, the route back to Gryffindor Tower clear and warm and certain. Chapter 6. What comes after winning? Harry spent the next 3 days in the hospital wing, which he considered deeply unnecessary and said so to Madame Pomfrey on the first morning, who looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard every variation of "I'm fine" from every category of patient and has not yet been persuaded by any of them. "You sealed a Horcrux fragment using original spellwork constructed from 15 separate magical inheritances," she said, checking his pulse with the brisk efficiency of someone who treats the miraculous as occupational routine. "You will stay in bed until I say otherwise." "I feel fine," Harry said. "You feel fine because the magical rebound hasn't fully resolved yet," she said. "When it does, you will feel considerably less fine, and I would prefer that to happen here rather than in a corridor." She produced a potion that was orange and smelled of burnt copper. "Drink." Harry drank. It tasted worse than it smelled. He was not, strictly speaking, injured. But Pomfrey was correct that something was resolving. The sealed fragment in his scar had changed the internal landscape of his magic in ways that were still settling, like furniture rearranging itself in a room that had been reorganized. The seal held perfectly, the fragment cold and still and isolated, but the space it had previously occupied was closing in around it, his own core filling the vacuum with the slow confidence of water finding its level. By the second day the rebound arrived, as predicted, and he spent most of it asleep, which was the most rest he'd had since the summer. He dreamed about the ward room, about the Founder's records, about Sprout's greenhouse in the morning quiet. Not nightmares. Just the ordinary processing of an eventful few months. Hermione visited both days, bringing books she described as relevant to ongoing research, and which were, by the second visit, clearly also comfort objects. She sat in the chair beside his bed and read while he dozed, and they didn't talk much, and it was good. Neville came in the afternoon of the second day with a small potted plant from the greenhouse that he set on the bedside table without ceremony. "Sprout said it improves ambient magical regulation," he said, sitting down. "Also I think she just wanted to send something." Harry looked at the plant. It was a small, neat thing with dark leaves that had a faint iridescence at their edges. It sat on the bedside table and was very slightly oriented toward him, the leaves tilted at an angle that was about 10 degrees too deliberate to be coincidental. "Thanks," Harry said. Ron came on the third morning with a very large bag of sweets from the Ollery and the news that the entire school was talking about what had happened, in the way schools talk about things, with maximum enthusiasm and minimum accuracy. The current dominant theory among Gryffindors was that Harry had fought Voldemort in single combat and won using a spell that didn't exist. Among Slytherins, the theory was that Harry had made a deal with something, because nothing else explained 15 Lordship rings on a first year. Ravenclaws had 3 competing theories and were conducting a poll. Hufflepuffs, Ron reported with some admiration, had decided that the details weren't their business and were focusing on making sure Harry had enough to eat when he got out. What actually happened? Ron said, sitting on the end of the bed. Harry told him. Not all of it, not the private things, the 3 weeks of preparation, the sealed fragment and what that meant for the long term. But the shape of it, Quirrell, the protections, the stone, the confrontation. Ron listened with the specific quality of attention he brought to things that mattered, which was different from his general conversational attention and considerably more focused. When Harry finished, Ron was quiet for a moment. The chess set, he said. McGonagall's endgame weakness, Harry said. 7 moves. Ron nodded slowly, processing. I could have helped with the chess, he said. Not complaining. Just observing. Next time, Harry said. There's going to be a next time? Almost certainly. Right. Ron helped himself to a sweet. Is Quirrell going to be all right? The healers from St. Mungo's say he'll recover, Harry said. Whatever Voldemort's presence had done to him, some of it is reversible. Not all. He looked at the ceiling. He'll never teach again. His magical core took too much damage. But he'll live. Ron was quiet for a moment. It could have been worse. Yes, Harry said. My mum wants to invite you for Christmas, Ron said, in the conversational gear shift of someone who has decided the heavy part of the conversation is done and is moving forward. Hermione too, and Neville if he wants. She heard what happened and you know how she is. Harry didn't know how she was. He had met Molly Weasley for approximately 4 minutes on a train platform, but he had observed enough in those 4 minutes to have a working model. Is there room? She'll make room, Ron said, in the tone of someone for whom this is simply a law of nature. There's always room. Tell her thank you, Harry said. I'd like that. Dumbledore came on the evening of the 3rd day. Harry was sitting up in bed reading one of the Peverell texts. He'd had Hermione retrieve it from the ward room, when the hospital wing door opened and Dumbledore came in wearing robes of deep violet and carrying, of all things, a tin of sherbet lemons, which he set on the bedside table with the air of someone who believes strongly in the social function of sugar. Harry set the book down. You look well, Dumbledore said, settling into the chair with the unhurried manner that Harry had learned to read as deliberate, not carelessness but the choice to project calm as a form of respect. Better than I expected, given what you did 3 nights ago. Madame Pomfrey is thorough, Harry said. She is that. He looked at the Peverell text, which was open to a section on death's gifts and their function. Making progress? Understanding the Hallows properly requires understanding the Peverell line's intent, Harry said. Which is different from the way they're usually discussed. They're not power objects. They're tools for accepting mortality. The cloak especially. He paused. My father's cloak. Dumbledore was quiet. You have it, Harry said. You borrowed it from my father before he died and you kept it. Yes, Dumbledore said. He did not pretend otherwise. I intended to return it to you at what I felt was the appropriate time. I'd like it back, Harry said. Of course. He reached into his robes, and produced it, which meant he had brought it, which meant he had known this conversation was coming and had chosen to come prepared for it. Harry took the cloak and held it in his hands, feeling the Peverell inheritance resonate with the object in a way that was immediate and specific. Not a flood of memory or emotion. Just recognition. This is yours. He folded it and set it beside the plant Neville had brought. I owe you a longer conversation, Dumbledore said. Several, probably. The headmaster looked at his hands in his lap, a gesture that was more genuinely unguarded than anything Harry had seen from him. I have been, for a very long time, managing things, Dumbledore said. People. Situations. The board, as it were. And I have told myself that I do this because the stakes require it. That individual choices must sometimes be overridden by the architecture of the larger plan. He paused. I still believe the stakes are real. I do not believe my approach has been fully correct. The stone is with Flamel now? Harry said. It will be destroyed at his request within the fortnight. And the other Horcruxes? Dumbledore looked at him. You know about them. I know there are others. The fragment in me was degraded enough to have absorbed echoes. Knowledge it shouldn't have shared but did because of how thoroughly it had eroded into my core. I know there are more anchors. I don't know all of them yet. He met Dumbledore's eyes. Tell me. And so Dumbledore told him. Not everything. Harry could feel the edges of what was being withheld, the specific shapes of what Dumbledore considered too much for now, but significantly more than Harry had expected from this conversation this soon. The diary. The ring. The locket, still out there. Possibly more. The process of how to destroy them, the limitations, the costs. Harry listened and did not interrupt, and when it was done he was quiet for a moment. The diary was destroyed 11 years ago, he said. Dumbledore looked at him sharply. How do you, Voldemort put one in the Weasley family's possession at some point, Harry said. The fragment knew that. I don't know when it surfaces, but it will. He kept his voice steady. We need to get ahead of it. Dumbledore leaned back. He was studying Harry with the expression that had been evolving since Gringotts, the look of someone whose model of Harry had started as a chess piece and was continuing to revise itself, not without difficulty, towards something more accurate. You are managing this, Dumbledore said. It was an observation rather than an accusation. I'm managing what I can manage, Harry said. I'm aware there are things I'm not capable of yet. I'm also aware there are things I'm more capable of than you expected, and the gap between those two things is where I think most of our problems have been living. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I want to work with you. I'm telling you this directly so there's no ambiguity. But working with you means information flows both ways. That is, Dumbledore said, slowly, a significant concession on your part. It's not a concession, Harry said. It's just how things work. You know things about the broader war that I don't know yet. I know things about Voldemort's current state that you don't know yet. Pretending those aren't complementary is stupid. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have been keeping a journal. About Tom, about Voldemort. His history, his making. The things I have discovered over 40 years. I would like you to read it. Harry blinked. You'd show me that. I believe it is past time. Dumbledore stood. He moved to the door and paused there, and Harry had the sense that this pause was not the calculated dramatic instinct of a man who had learned to use silence as a tool, but something more unguarded, a man standing at the edge of a habit he had decided to change. I am sorry, Dumbledore said. For the cupboard. For the years of it. For choosing a location over your well-being and telling myself the protections were worth the cost. He did not look at Harry as he said it. They were not. Harry looked at the cloak folded on the bedside table. I know you believed you were protecting me, he said. I was protecting the world at your expense, Dumbledore said. Those are not the same thing. No, Harry said. They're not. Dumbledore left. The door swung shut behind him and the hospital wing was quiet in the particular way of a space where something real had just happened and the air was still settling around it. Harry lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling. He did not feel triumphant. Triumph was for people who had wanted a fight and won it. What he felt was something closer to the feeling of putting something down that you have been carrying incorrectly for a long time, not relief exactly, not yet, but the first moment of understanding how the relief would feel when it arrived. He was released the following morning, which was a Friday. He walked back into the flow of the school with the equanimity of someone who has been through something significant and has decided the most appropriate response is to go to breakfast and then to herbology. The equanimity was tested approximately 45 seconds after he entered the entrance hall. The ministry representatives had arrived. There were 3 of them, 2 witches and a wizard in formal ministry robes, the particular shade of plum that indicated the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at a level senior enough to have opinions about things. They were in conversation with McGonagall near the foot of the staircase, and all 3 of them looked up when Harry came in, with the specific attention of people who have been waiting for a particular person to arrive. "Mr. Potter," said the wizard in the center, who was tall and had the specific brand of self-importance that ministry authority produced in people who had held it long enough to stop remembering it was provisional. His name, Harry would learn, was Cornelius Fudge, and he was the Minister for Magic, which he appeared to find extremely significant. "We have been hoping to speak with you." "Minister," McGonagall said, in the tone she reserved for people who were complicating her morning. "Perhaps Mr. Potter could eat breakfast first." "It's perfectly fine," Harry said, which was true. He looked at Fudge with the clear-eyed interest he gave everyone. "What can I do for you?" Fudge did the thing that everyone did when they met Harry in person for the first time, the eyes dropping to the scar, the rings, the visible evidence of someone who had been described to them but not prepared for. He recovered with the practiced speed of a politician. "There are some significant concerns," Fudge said, "that the ministry has regarding the events of Wednesday evening." "Which concerns specifically?" "The engagement with," Fudge lowered his voice, which in the entrance hall of Hogwarts at 8 in the morning was a relative concept. "With you-know-who." "Voldemort," Harry said, at normal volume. Fudge went pale. One of the witches beside him made a small involuntary sound. "Voldemort attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. "He was using Professor Quirrell as a host. I addressed the situation and the stone is now being returned to Nicholas Flamel. Professor Quirrell is recovering at St. Mungo's. Voldemort's fragment is contained." He paused. "Is there a specific concern I can address, or is this a general visit?" Fudge stared at him for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "The ministry's position is that, that Voldemort was destroyed 11 years ago." "The current official record is incorrect," Harry said pleasantly. "He wasn't destroyed. He was diminished and disembodied. There's a meaningful difference, and the ministry's official position being incorrect doesn't make him less real." He looked at Fudge with the patience of someone who has had a significantly more important week than this conversation and is allocating it appropriately. "If the ministry would like a formal report of what happened Wednesday evening, I'm happy to provide one. I'd also suggest a review of the protections on Azkaban, specifically regarding the Dementor situation, but that's a larger conversation." The 3 ministry representatives exchanged looks. Fudge's expression had moved through several phases and landed on something that was trying to be authoritative and landing closer to overwhelmed. "You are 11 years old," he said, and he said it the way people say things when they are genuinely uncertain what else to say. 12 in July, Harry said. "Can I go to breakfast now?" McGonagall made a sound that was very precisely not a laugh. "Mr. Potter, I believe the ministry representatives will be meeting with the headmaster this morning. I'll see that your interests are represented." "Thank you, Professor," Harry said, and went to breakfast. He had been at the Gryffindor table for approximately 3 minutes when the owls came. Not the usual trickle of Morning Post, a cascade of it, owls banking in through the enchanted ceiling with an efficiency that suggested coordinated deployment rather than coincidence. 3 landed in front of Harry simultaneously, which was enough of an event that the tables around him went quiet. The first letter bore the Gringotts seal. Harry opened it. "Lord Potter Peveril Gryffindor et al., Gringotts Bank has, as of this morning, filed 3 international claims on your behalf with the International Confederation of Wizards. First, formal recognition of the Convergent Lord status under the 1308 Magical Sovereignty Accord. Second, notification to the British Ministry of Magic that the guardianship of Harry James Potter falls under Gringotts jurisdiction as of September 1 of this year. Third, a formal inquiry regarding the management of The Potter estate in the years 1981 to 1991, the findings of which will be shared with you in due course. Sharpclaw, head of inheritance and lineage. There was a handwritten note at the bottom in different, older handwriting, which Harry recognized as Ragnok's. Well handled. Come when you can. Harry folded the letter and opened the second, which bore a seal he didn't immediately recognize, dark blue wax with an astronomical symbol pressed into it. Inside, the ICW has received Gringotts' filing and will respond within 30 days. For what it's worth, we have been waiting for this filing for several decades. Congratulations on your first year. EB, ICW representative, retired, nominally. He didn't know who EB was. He filed it for later. The third letter had no seal at all. Just his name on the envelope in handwriting he'd seen once before, angular, controlled. N. Black, clearly. He opened it. You dealt with the situation on Wednesday before it became worse, which is the only metric that matters. I have been aware of your lordship status since Gringotts filed in September. The Black family formally acknowledges your claim. When you are ready to discuss what that means practically, I am at your disposal. The family has resources and debts that are relevant to your situation. Sirius B. Harry read that one twice. Then he read it a third time. What's that? Ron said, from beside him, already halfway through his eggs. The Black family acknowledging the lordship, Harry said. Oh. Right. Ron absorbed this. Sirius Black is in Azkaban. He is, Harry said. This letter is signed by someone in Azkaban. My dad says the owls can get through to Azkaban, Ron said. If you know the protocol. Ministry oversight required, but, they're allowed mail. He paused. He must have heard what happened. The whole wizarding world heard what happened, basically. Harry folded the letter carefully and put it in his bag. The Sirius Black question was large and complicated and had roots he didn't fully understand yet. He knew the surface of it, the story of the man who'd allegedly betrayed his parents, the 12 years of Azkaban, the conviction that had happened without trial. He'd found the trial record gap in the wardroom, buried in a legal history text he'd pulled out almost at random, and had noted it with the specific attention of someone who was learning to trust notes made at random for future retrieval. He knew Sirius Black was his godfather. He knew Sirius Black was in Azkaban. He knew, from the fragment's degraded knowledge, that the story as widely told had the shape of something that had been built quickly and not examined carefully. He did not know what the truth was. He intended to find out. When do we go to Gringotts? Hermione said, appearing from across the table and sitting next to him with the directness of someone who has been thinking about this since breakfast started and has determined that now is the appropriate time. Over Christmas, probably, Harry said. Before we go to the Weasleys. You're coming to ours? Ron said. Your mum invited me, Harry said. Ron's face went through a rapid succession of pleased reactions, the fastest of which was also the most genuine, not the performance of not caring but the actual, uncomplicated pleasure of someone who wanted his friend to come and is glad his friend is coming. Brilliant, he said. Neville found Harry after lunch, outside near the greenhouses where Harry had taken to spending the middle of the day when the weather wasn't impossible. Today it was merely cold, the kind of cold that had no particular agenda, and the grounds were empty of students this close to the end of term. Neville sat on the bench beside him without preamble. He had Trevor in his pocket, which was a constant, and his herbology textbook under his arm, which was new. He'd started carrying it not as required reading but as voluntary reading, which Harry thought was one of the more accurate measures of how much had changed in 3 months. Gran sent another letter, Neville said. Good news? She wants to meet you. Over the break, if that's, she wants to say thank you in person. He was looking at the greenhouses, not at Harry. For the treaty. And for, he paused. She said she watched you handle the ministry this morning. Apparently it's already in the Prophet. Already? It's a very slow news cycle in late November. Neville finally looked at him. She said, and I'm quoting, "That boy has the right shape of spine." High praise. Harry guessed. Extremely. Neville picked at a thread on his sleeve. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "The treaty bond. The resonance. You said it might help my magic settle because it would find the frequency it matches." "Yes. I think it's working," Neville said. "I've been thinking about it because I noticed something in charms on Tuesday. When we were in the same room and both casting mine, I could feel it working with yours. Not yours pushing mine. Just working alongside it. Like it knows where it is." Harry had noticed that too. The specific harmonic of the bond, the centuries-old resonance between two family magics, finding its calibration. He hadn't said anything because he hadn't wanted Neville to feel observed. "That's how it's supposed to work," Harry said. "It's going to keep happening. I think it'll keep settling more and more over time." The bond was documented because the two family cores kept moving toward harmony naturally. "We're just resuming something that got interrupted." Neville was quiet for a moment. "That's good," he said. Not with dramatic relief. Just with the plainness of someone for whom it actually is good, straightforwardly, without complication. He stopped and started again. "My magic has always felt like it was apologizing for existing. And now it's just there. Being there without apologizing." Harry looked at the castle. The sun was doing something interesting with the upper towers, catching the stone at an angle that made the windows bright. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." Neville nodded. They sat in the cold and didn't talk for a while, which was comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when the work of establishing the comfort is done. "What are you going to do about Sirius Black?" Neville said, eventually. Harry had told both Neville and Hermione about the letter that morning. "Find out what actually happened," Harry said. "The trial record doesn't exist. In a country that processes dark wizard captures through the Wisengamot, no record means no trial, and no trial means either a ministry decision made outside of normal process or someone very powerful making something disappear." He paused. "Ragnok may know. Gringotts has records the ministry doesn't control. And if he didn't do it?" Neville said. "Then he's been in Azkaban for 11 years for something he didn't do," Harry said. "Which is a problem I intend to address." Neville was quiet for a moment. "Right," he said. "Then, can I help with that?" "Yes," Harry said. "When we get the records from Gringotts, I'd like you to read them. You're better at reading people than I give credit for." "Hermione said the same thing last week," Neville said, with a surprise that was becoming less frequent and more brief. "Hermione is right about most things," Harry said. "She's usually right about people too, she just phrases it differently." Neville smiled. It was the smile of someone who has stopped expecting to be left out of things and is still getting used to it. "She told me she's already written to Gringotts requesting an appointment," he said. Harry looked at him. "She didn't tell me that. She knew you'd go anyway and thought scheduling in advance was more efficient." Neville stood, collecting his textbook. "She's not wrong." "No," Harry said. "She rarely is." The last event of term arrived in the form of Malfoy, which Harry had been expecting in a general sense without knowing the timing. It was the evening before the school broke for Christmas, the common room full of the particular energy of a space preparing to empty, trunks being packed, owls being organized, the slightly manic cheerfulness of people about to go home. Malfoy was not in the Gryffindor common room, obviously, but he caught Harry in the entrance hall with the specific purposefulness of someone who has been engineering an opportunity and has finally gotten one. He was alone, not the Crabbe and Goyle configuration of the Sorting Night, just himself, and without the audience his manner was different. Less performed. "Potter," he said. "Malfoy," Harry said. They looked at each other. Malfoy had the expression of someone working through something they'd been working through for a while and had not quite resolved. "The Black Lordship," Malfoy said. "You've acknowledged the claim." "Gringotts filed it," Harry said. "I acknowledged their filing." "My mother is a black," Malfoy said, and behind the cool delivery was something more genuine. "She left when she married. The family, it's complicated. But the Lordship being active means, there are things that would change. For her." Harry looked at him. Not with impatience, not with the tolerant performance of someone waiting for the real thing, he looked at Malfoy the way he looked at everything now, with the attention of someone who had learned that surfaces were information about depth. What he saw was a boy who had a great deal of family feeling and no vocabulary for it that his upbringing had sanctioned, navigating it through the only language he'd been given, which was politics and status and the leverage of bloodline. "The Lordship is active," Harry said. "What that means for your mother's position in the family is something I'd need to understand better before I could speak to specifically. But if she wants to re-establish a connection to the main line, that's not something I'd refuse without reason." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. This was clearly not the conversation he had planned. The conversation he had planned had a script, and the script required Harry to be a certain kind of person, and Harry kept failing to be that person. "You're not what I expected," Malfoy said. He said it with the specific resentment of someone who is annoyed at themselves for saying it. "I keep hearing that," Harry said. "I was told," Malfoy stopped. Started again. "My father told me you'd be manageable. Either very easy to befriend and use, or easily opposed. That there was no version of Harry Potter that required genuine consideration. Your father was working from incomplete information," Harry said. "Yes," Malfoy said. It cost him something to say it, but he said it without flinching, which Harry noted as the most significant thing Malfoy had done in their entire acquaintance. "What do you want, Malfoy?" Harry asked. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. Malfoy looked at the entrance hall for a moment, at the students flowing around them in both directions, the noise of end-of-term packing up. "I don't know yet," he said finally, which was more honest than anything he had said before. "My father has plans. For me, for the family. They made sense when I thought the world was shaped a certain way." He looked at the rings, briefly. "The world is not shaped the way I thought." "No," Harry said. "Probably not." "I'm not asking for anything," Malfoy said quickly, which was the fastest thing he'd said in any conversation with Harry, as if speed could prevent it from sounding like what it was. "I know," Harry said. "I'm not offering anything. Except this," he paused, choosing the words carefully, "you're 11 years old. So am I. The decisions your father has already made are his decisions. The ones you make from here are yours." He held Malfoy's gaze. "That's actually quite a lot of freedom, if you decide to use it." Malfoy stared at him. Something moved through his expression that Harry couldn't fully read. It was complicated and genuine, and probably the most real thing he'd seen on Malfoy's face. "You're infuriating," Malfoy said, in the tone of someone delivering an observation rather than an insult. "Probably," Harry agreed. Malfoy walked away. Not dramatically, just turned and walked back toward the dungeons with the posture of someone who has more to think about than they had an hour ago. Harry watched him go and thought about the shape of choices and how early the important ones got made and what it meant that Malfoy had sought him out alone. He'd watch. He'd see. He went back to the ward room that night. Not with Hermione or Neville, alone, for the first time in several weeks, going through the familiar sequence, the dark corridor, the third door, the warmth of recognition as the lock turned. The inner chamber was exactly as it always was. He sat at the table in the center and put both hands flat on the stone surface and closed his eyes. The castle's awareness met him immediately, the low warm register of its attention, the sense of enormous age and accumulated intelligence focused gently in his direction. He sat with it for a moment the way you sit with something you have come to trust. He thought about the year. Platform 9 3/4 and the ground coming up to meet him. Ragnok's dry voice saying unprecedented for the first of many times. The ritual pool and 63 doors opening. Hermione on the station wall with her book. Neville's face when the hat said Gryffindor. The ward room opening for the first time. McGonagall and 3 matches and the patience the important parts require. Flitwick and charm harmonics. Sprout and the heat vent and what plants want. The ward map showing the 3rd floor. 3 weeks of sitting with the fragment, getting to know its edges. Quirrell's face without the puppeteer in it. The stone warm in his open hand. Dumbledore at the hospital wing door saying I am sorry to a room he'd already half left. Sirius Black's letter folded in his bag. The Horcruxes still out there, each one a thing to be found and addressed. A sealed fragment cold and contained in his scar, waiting for the knowledge Hermione was accumulating, the specific understanding of how to end it. He opened his eyes and looked at the shelves. The record books, the documents, the objects. He looked at the compass on its plinth, which was now pointing in 3 directions with the steady purpose of something that had recalibrated to a new normal. He thought about the ward room on the first night, the 3 of them standing in it with the particular awe of people who had just arrived somewhere that had been waiting for them. He was the convergent lord of 15 bloodlines. He was the heir of people who had built this castle and split it and argued about it and built it again and loved it imperfectly and left their marks in its stones for 1,000 years. He was the son of James and Lily Potter, who had been brave enough to die for something they loved, and he intended to be worthy of that without being defined by it. He was 11 years old. 12 in July. He had a godfather in Azkaban and a soul fragment in his scar and a castle that talked to him and 2 friends who read restricted section books at 5 in the morning and 1 friend who had just learned that his magic was not apologizing anymore. He had a great deal of work to do. He put his hands flat on the table and felt the castle feel him back, that old, patient intelligence, the accumulated intention of everyone who had poured themselves into these stones, settling around him with the warmth of genuine recognition. Okay, he told it, not in words. The castle said something back, not in words either, in the register below words where the real communication happened. Something that translated, approximately, as, good and we know and we have been here and this is the beginning. Harry sat in the amber light and let himself feel the full weight of what the year had given him, not the dramatic or the triumphant part but the real part, the human part. He had people. He had a place. He had a castle that had opinions about him and had decided those opinions were favorable. He had allies in a goblin nation that predated the ministry by 8 centuries. He had enemies worth having and problems worth solving and the fundamental equipment for both. He had, for the first time in his life, something he had not been aware he was missing until he found it, and now that he knew the shape of it he understood how large the absence had been. He had somewhere he was supposed to be. He stayed in the ward room for another hour, reading, the amber lamps warm and steady overhead, the castle breathing around him in its slow, ancient, thoroughly opinionated way. When he left, the door locked behind him with the sound it always made, that small, satisfied click that meant the room knew he'd be back. He walked back through the corridor to Gryffindor Tower, past the dozing portraits and the low-burned torches, through the portrait hole and into the warm red common room where the fire had burned down to coals and the last few students had long since gone to bed. He sat in his chair. The one by the fire, the one that had become his in the way things become yours by repeated choosing. Above the fireplace, Heloise Macmillan was awake, watching him with the patient attention of something that has 378 years of perspective on 11-year-olds arriving at Hogwarts. Well, she said. Well, Harry agreed. Next year, she said. Next year, he confirmed. He leaned back in the chair and looked at the dark window where the Scottish sky had gone fully black and full of stars, and thought about godfathers and Horcruxes and ministry reform and the Weasleys' kitchen and what Neville's grandmother's handshake would feel like and whether Malfoy would make the right choice and what Ragnok's face would do when Harry arrived at Gringotts in January and told him about the sealed fragment and the diary Horcrux and the full shape of what was still left to be. Done. He thought about all of it with the same quality of attention he'd been building all year, not anxious, not overwhelmed, just present and interested and ready, the way you are when the thing in front of you is genuinely yours and you know it. The fire crackled. Harry Potter sat in his chair, in his tower, in his castle, wearing 15 rings on hands that had stopped being surprised by what they could do, and looked at the stars, and thought, all right, then. What's next?